We're just trespassing in the graveyard. Chapter 33, The Iron Centipede and the Severed Track. The subterranean concourse vibrated with the catastrophic force of an earthquake. The deafening, rhythmic chug-chug-chug echoing from the pitch-black tunnel wasn't just sound, it was a physical pressure that squeezed the air from their lungs. "Enu! Get them behind the reinforced gates!" Cha Hyun-soo bellowed, his voice carrying the unnatural, echoing resonance of an apex monster. Enu didn't waste a second. She slung her heavy crossbow over her shoulder and grabbed the nearest civilian. "Move your asses! Into the maintenance tunnels, now!" Tae-hoon, his scrap metal armor groaning, instantly shifted to the rear guard, ushering Jae-won and the terrified survivors toward the heavy steel blast doors at the far end of the platform. Jang Ju-won dragged the unconscious Bong-sok along the tiles, his own rapid regeneration sealing the horrific punctures in his spine just fast enough to keep him walking. Sebastian didn't retreat. He stood at the very edge of the cracked concrete platform. His right arm was a pulverized, useless mass, and his right eye was swollen completely shut. His internal temperature was skyrocketing, the system desperately trying to keep his failing organs functioning. Critical warning, cellular degradation at 47%. System command, disengage. 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 Sebastian ignored the flashing red text, his one good eye locked onto the abyss of the tunnel. The two glowing yellow eyes grew exponentially larger, illuminating the dark. With a deafening shriek of grinding metal and tearing concrete, the centipede express exploded into the station. It was a monstrosity of unfathomable scale. It was literally a twisted, corrupted subway train, but the metal carriages had been completely fused with churning, mountainous mounds of black biological mass. Massive, chitinous insectoid legs, hundreds of them, forged from reinforced steel and bone, burst through the sides of the train cars, propelling the colossal beast forward along the tracks at terrifying speed. Its face was the shattered front cabin of the train, completely peeled open like a blossoming flower of jagged, rusting metal. Inside the metallic maw was a swirling vortex of glowing, acidic saliva and thousands of razor-sharp, grinding teeth. Alert, Siege Class Mutated Entity detected. Monster Type, the Iron Centipede, Desire, to never stop, Warning, Colossal Kinetic Momentum. Evasion is mandatory. It doesn't stop. Sang-wook roared over the noise, gripping his newly acquired bone blade with both hands. "It's gonna ram the whole platform. I've got the front." Hyun-soo yelled, his eyes burning with absolute, sorrowful fury. The half-blood didn't jump out of the way. He jumped directly onto the tracks. The colossal iron centipede barreled toward him, a multi-ton nightmare of steel and flesh moving at 60 miles an hour. Hyun-soo planted his bare feet into the wooden ties of the track. His massive, skeletal black wing flared out, anchoring into the concrete walls on either side of the tunnel. His mutated right arm swelled, the jagged obsidian flesh pulsing violently as the claws elongated into 6-foot, red-hot blades of biomatter. The beast's massive, grinding maw slammed into him. Krrr crash. The shockwave blew out every remaining light bulb in the station. Hyun-soo was pushed backward, his bare feet plowing deep trenches through the solid concrete floor, but he didn't break. With a primal, roaring exertion of impossible strength, Hyun-soo buried his red-hot biomatter blades directly into the steel and flesh lower jaw of the train beast, physically stopping the colossal engine's forward momentum. Steam and acidic blood erupted everywhere as the hot biomatter seared the monster's flesh. The centipede shrieked, its hundreds of steel legs thrashing wildly against the walls and platform, tearing down support pillars. "Cut the legs!" Hyun-soo roared over the beast's deafening cries. "If it gets traction, it'll crush me." Sang-wook didn't hesitate. The scarred fighter leaped off the platform, plunging into the chaos. He swung the massive executioner's bone blade with everything he had. The triangular bone sheared flawlessly through the thick, steel-plated insectoid legs of the first carriage, severing them in a spray of black ichor. Ju-1 dropped Bong-sok behind a concrete pillar and vaulted onto the tracks, his fists raised. The immortal man targeted the joints connecting the train cars. He threw punches with the force of cannonballs, shattering the biological connective tissue and forcing the beast to buckle in the center. But the centipede was over 10 carriages long. The rear cars were still pushing, their hundreds of legs digging frantically into the steel rails, building an overwhelming, crushing pressure against Hyun-soo. Hyun-soo groaned, his knees buckling slightly. Too much, wait. Sebastian watched the massive steel wheels of the beast grinding against the tracks. The system had warned him of complete biological failure, but the logic was simple: if Hyun-soo fell, the beast would plow through the station and slaughter everyone. It's a train, Sebastian's cold, calculating mind deduced, fighting through the agonizing migraine of his fractured skull. Mutated or not, it still relies on the rails for absolute traction. Sebastian slowly stepped off the platform, dropping onto the tracks just behind where Hyun-soo was holding the beast's maw. He fell to his knees, his broken right arm dangling, and pressed his good left palm flat against the cold steel of the subway rail. Active skill, ferromagnetic resonance engaged. Active skill, seismic tremor engaged. Kid! Get back! Sang-wook yelled, dodging. A massive, thrashing steel leg. You're bleeding out. Hyun-soo! Sebastian roared, his voice trembling with sheer, unadulterated exertion. When I say drop, you push it up. Hyun-soo glanced back, his red eyes widening as he saw the blinding white light of the magnetic field wrapping around Sebastian's left arm. The half-blood gave a single, tight nod. Sebastian closed his eyes. He didn't just pull on the metal. He sent a massive, localized seismic shockwave straight down the steel rails, shattering the concrete bolts holding them to the floor for 100 yards down the tunnel. Warning: cellular integrity at 12%. Immediate cessation required. Now! Sebastian screamed, his nose and ears bleeding freely. Hyun-soo violently changed his leverage. Instead of pushing back against the beast, the half-blood thrust his red-hot blades upward, forcing the front carriage of the iron centipede into the air. At the exact same microsecond, Sebastian unleashed the full, catastrophic power of his ferromagnetic resonance. He violently ripped both solid steel rails completely out of the concrete floor. The heavy steel tracks snapped like guitar strings. Guided by Sebastian's magnetic will, the massive, jagged rails whipped upward, wrapping tightly around the elevated throat and front wheels of the colossal beast. Derail, Sebastian whispered. With a brutal twist of his left hand, Sebastian violently wrenched the magnetically charged tracks sideways. The physics of the maneuver were utterly devastating. Deprived of its rails, lifted into the air, and violently pulled to the right by hundreds of tons of magnetic force, the iron centipede completely lost its center of gravity. The front carriage violently twisted, slamming into the concrete wall of the station. The kinetic momentum of the 10 carriages behind it had nowhere to go. Krrr boom! The massive beast derailed in spectacular, catastrophic fashion. Carriages piled up on top of each other, smashing through the reinforced concrete pillars and utterly destroying the platform. Steel snapped, biomatter exploded, and the deafening screech of twisting metal echoed for miles. The iron centipede collapsed into a massive, twitching mountain of dead flesh and crushed steel, its yellow eyes flickering before dying out completely. A suffocating silence fell over the ruined station, broken only by the hiss of steam and settling debris. Sang-wook pulled himself out from under a pile of rubble, panting heavily, his bone blade covered in black blood. Ju-1 dusted off his shoulders, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. Hyun-soo retracted his massive skeletal wing, his red-hot blades cooling back into a normal, human arm. He walked over the ruined, severed tracks toward Sebastian. Sebastian was still on his knees. The blinding magnetic light faded from his hand. He looked up at the half-blood with his one good eye. "You're completely insane," Hyun-soo said softly, a look of profound respect crossing his sorrowful face. "You ripped the tracks right out from under it." "Physics," Sebastian whispered, his voice incredibly faint. "Always wins." Suddenly, the blue system interface didn't just flash, it exploded across Sebastian's vision, turning entirely black. "Critical biological failure detected. Host cellular structure has collapsed. Initiating emergency hibernation protocol. Warning, the host will be incapacitated during the reconstruction phase. Estimated time, unknown." Sebastian didn't even have time to swear. The world tilted violently. The last thing he felt was the cold, cracked concrete of the subway floor rushing up to meet him, and the heavy, metallic darkness of the system pulling him down into the void. Chapter 34, The Hibernation Protocol and the Cold Calculation. The silence that followed the death of the iron centipede was heavier than the ruined concrete surrounding them. Sebastian didn't simply fall, his body shut down with the terrifying, absolute finality of a machine having its power cord violently ripped from the wall. Jang Ju-won moved with supernatural speed, catching the teenager before his head could strike the cracked subway tiles. The immortal man grunted, nearly dropping him. Sebastian's body was radiating an immense, blistering heat, and his metallic sheen skin was covered in deep, glowing blue fissures. As if the energy inside him was desperately trying to tear its way out. "Kid! Hey, kid!" Sang-wook rushed over, dropping his bone blade to check Sebastian's pulse. "He's burning up," Ju-won hissed, his own rapidly healing hands blistering where he touched Sebastian's armor-plated shoulders. "His right arm is completely pulverized. His pulse it's erratic. It's too slow." Cha Hyun-soo stepped closer, his sad red eyes scanning Sebastian's fractured, glowing body. The half-blood tilted his head, listening to a frequency only apex mutants could hear. "He isn't dying," Hyun-soo said softly, a note of awe in his voice. "He's metamorphosing. His body couldn't handle the physics of what he just did, so his cells are tearing themselves apart to rebuild something stronger. If we leave him out here, the heat signature will attract every predator in Sector 4 within the hour." Enu lowered her heavy crossbow, eyeing the glowing teenager with intense suspicion. "Hyun-soo, you can't be serious. Look at him. He's a walking nuke. If he goes critical inside the sanctuary, he'll wipe out the entire camp." "He saved our lives," Hyun-soo replied, his voice firm. "And he derailed a siege class. We owe him. We owe him a quick death before he turns into something we can't kill," a new, chillingly calm voice echoed from the shadows of the maintenance tunnel. Stepping into the dim light of the ruined concourse was a tall, slender young man with neatly parted hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a pristine, salvaged military trench coat and held a clipboard. His eyes were devoid of the sorrow that plagued Hyun-soo, instead, they held the cold, unyielding calculation of a supercomputer. "Ian Hyuk," Hyun-soo acknowledged, the tension in his shoulders tightening. Lee Ian Hyuk, the pragmatic brain behind the Green Home Coalition, adjusted his glasses. His gaze swept over the bloody, battered group: the massive Ju-won, the scarred Sang-wook, the heavily armored Tae-hoon, and the 15 shivering civilians. Finally, his eyes locked onto Sebastian's glowing, comatose form. "You bring strays, Hyun-soo. That is your nature," Ian Hyuk said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "I accept the pure humans. We need the labor." But I will not allow a volatile abyssal anomaly into the bunker. You don't get a say, Four Eyes, Sang-wook growled, picking up his massive bone blade and stepping between Ian Hyuk and Sebastian. The kid comes with us, or we carve our own path through you. Ian Hyuk didn't flinch. He simply raised a hand. From the shadows of the maintenance tunnels, a dozen heavily armed survivors stepped out. They raised scavenged assault rifles, heavy harpoon guns, and Molotov cocktails. Red laser sights painted Ju-won, Sang-wook, and Taehoon's chests. I always get a say, Ian Hyuk replied coldly. Put the anomaly down. It's for the survival of the majority. The math is simple. Deep within the pitch-black void of Sebastian's subconscious, there was no sound of the standoff. There was only the system. For the first time since he acquired the interface, the pain nullification was entirely offline. Sebastian floated in a sterile, digital darkness, his consciousness screaming in pure, unadulterated agony as thousands of lines of glowing blue code acted like razor-sharp sutures, violently stitching his shattered cellular matrix back together. Emergency hibernation protocol, active. Phase 1, purging necrotic tissue. Complete. Phase 2, fusing abyssal biomass to fractured skeletal structure. In progress, he could feel his pulverized right arm being broken down at the molecular level. The bone marrow was being scooped out and replaced by a cold, heavy, liquid iron extracted from the ferromagnetic resonance he had absorbed. He was becoming less human by the second, traded away piece by piece for pure, ruthless survivability. Wake up, Sebastian's mind thrashed against the digital restraints. I can't be asleep. The Architect's Hounds, the Wasteland. Warning, consciousness override denied. Biological reconstruction is at 62%. Premature awakening will result in cardiac rupture. Host must remain dormant. Suddenly, a harsh, blaring red alarm cut through the sterile blue void of the system. External threat detected. Host body is being targeted by lethal intent. Through the sensory feedback loop of his paralyzed body, Sebastian felt the red laser sights painting his chest. He heard the click of assault rifle safeties being disengaged in the real world. He was entirely helpless. But the system, parasitic and deeply integrated into his soul, refused to let its host be terminated by mere bullets. Emergency override, autonomous defense protocol activated. Handing limited motor control to subroutines. In the ruined subway concourse, the tension was a hair trigger away from a bloodbath. I'm going to give you 3 seconds to lower your weapons, Ian Hyuk stated, looking at his watch. Or my people will execute you and burn the anomaly's body. Try it, Taehoon roared, stepping in front of the civilians and raising his massive rotor blade sword. Ju-won tightened his grip on Sebastian, his muscles coiling to charge the firing squad. 1, Ian Hyuk counted. Ian Hyuk, don't do this. Hyun-soo yelled, stepping into the line of fire. 2, Ian Hyuk continued, his face an impenetrable mask of pragmatism. Before he could say 3, the air in the subway station violently warped. A deafening, high-frequency hum erupted from Sebastian's comatose body. The glowing blue fissures on his metallic skin turned a blinding, furious white. What's he doing? Ian Yu yelled, taking a step back as her crossbow began to violently vibrate in her hands. Sebastian didn't open his eyes. He didn't wake up. But driven by the system's autonomous defense protocol, his body slowly, mechanically levitated out of Ju-won's arms. Suspended in the air, completely unconscious, Sebastian's left hand slowly raised. Autonomous protocol, ferromagnetic resonance maximum output. The assault rifles in the hands of Ian Hyuk's guards violently shrieked. Without a single gesture, the magnetic field erupted. Every single metallic weapon in a 50-foot radius, the assault rifles, the harpoon guns, even Ian Hayek's clipboard and glasses was violently ripped from their hands. The weapons flew through the air, congregating in a massive, swirling sphere of twisted metal floating directly above Sebastian's comatose, glowing body. The steel groaned and compressed, crushed by an invisible, localized gravity well until it formed a dense, multi-ton sphere of pure, jagged iron. Ian Hayek stood completely still, his vision blurred without his glasses, staring at the terrifying display of raw, unconscious power. Sebastian's body hung in the air, his eyes shut tight, the massive sphere of crushed weapons hovering above him like the sword of Damocles, ready to drop and pulverize the entire coalition squad at the slightest provocation. He's doing this in his sleep. Sang-wook breathed, lowering his bone blade in sheer awe. Hyun-soo looked at Ian Hayek, the red glow of his eyes piercing through the dim light. I told you. Ian Hayek. He derailed the train. Do you really want to test the math on what he'll do if you shoot at him? Ian Hayek looked at his disarmed squad, then up at the multi-ton sphere of iron threatening to crush them all. For the first time, a bead of sweat rolled down the pragmatic leader's cheek. Stand down, Ian Hayek ordered his men, his voice tight. He looked at Ju-won, who was watching the floating teenager. With a mix of pride and caution. Bring him inside, Ian Hayek conceded, turning on his heel and walking into the dark maintenance tunnel. But if he wakes up and kills us all, I want it on record that I was right. Slowly, the blinding white light faded from Sebastian's skin. The magnetic field released, and the massive sphere of crushed guns plummeted, crashing into the concrete floor with a deafening boom. Sebastian's body dropped out of the air, and Ju-won caught him once more, hauling the unconscious teenager over his shoulder. You heard the man, Ju-won grunted to the rest of the group. Let's get indoors. But deep within the system void, as the reconstruction ticked up to 70%, Sebastian knew the true threat wasn't the humans in the bunker. It was the abyssal signature his echolocation had pinged just before he collapsed, a signature that was currently rapidly burrowing its way toward the coalition's walls. Chapter 35, The Subterranean Siege and the Iron Marrow. The Green Home Coalition bunker was a masterpiece of desperate, apocalyptic engineering. Led by the cold, calculating Lee Ian Hayek, the survivors descended deeper into the maintenance shafts of the subway network, passing through 3 successive heavy blast doors forged from scavenged subway cars and biological resin. The air inside smelled of stale sweat, antiseptic, and the faint, coppery tang of fear. Hundreds of survivors were packed into the dimly lit lower concourse, living in makeshift tents and heavily fortified barricades. They looked at the newcomers with a mixture of terror and awe. They stared at Hyun-soo's monstrous wing dragging across the floor, Sang-wook's massive triangular bone blade, and, most intently, at the unconscious teenager slung over Jang Ju-won's shoulder, whose metallic skin was still faintly pulsing with blue, web-like fissures. Quarantine sector, Ian Hayek ordered, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He pointed to a heavily reinforced concrete holding cell originally designed for electrical transformers. The uninfected civilians can integrate. The rest of you stay in the box until I ascertain your threat level. We aren't animals, Tae-hoon growled, his dented scrap metal armor scraping against the narrow walls. You're an unknown variable, Ian Hayek replied, utterly devoid of empathy. And the anomaly is a ticking bomb. If he wakes up hostile, I want him surrounded by 3 feet of reinforced concrete. Ju-won didn't argue. He was exhausted, his body aching from the sheer caloric burn of his rapid regeneration. He carried Sebastian into the holding cell and gently laid him on a cot. Sang-wook followed, leaning his bone blade against the wall, while Hyun-soo stood by the heavy iron bars of the door, his sad, glowing red eyes keeping a silent vigil over the group. How long does this hibernation take? Ju-won asked, looking at Hyun-soo. I don't know, the half-blood answered softly. When my body tore itself apart to build this arm, I was out for 3 days. But his energy feels different. It's not driven by desire. It's structural. Like a machine repairing its own engine. Inside the pitch-black digital void of Sebastian's subconscious, the machine was doing exactly that. Biological reconstruction at 88%. Integrating ferromagnetic resonance into the skeletal matrix of the right limb. Warning: neural pathways are experiencing extreme voltage spikes. Pain. Nullification currently bypassed. Sebastian's consciousness screamed in the dark, completely paralyzed. He could feel the marrow inside his shattered right arm boiling. The system wasn't just knitting the pulverized bone back together, it was replacing the organic core entirely. Heavy, dense liquid iron extracted directly from his magnetic abilities was being channeled into the hollows of his radius and ulna, fusing with the hypercalcified abyssal bone. His right arm was becoming something entirely new. A biological railgun conduit. Reconstruction at 92%. But as the system worked, the external sensory array continued to feed data directly into Sebastian's mind. The echolocation ping he had felt just before blacking out wasn't a glitch. In the digital darkness, a massive, terrifying red radar blip appeared. It was directly beneath them. And it was moving straight up. Wake up! Sebastian's mind thrashed against the cold logic of the system. They don't know it's coming. Warning: premature awakening will result in cardiac arrest. Host must remain dormant. Reconstruction at 95%. Outside, in the physical world, Ian Hayek stood before a massive map of the subway tunnels pinned to a corkboard. Ian Yu sat on a nearby crate, loading heavy steel bolts into her crossbow. I don't like this, Ian Hayek, Ian Yu muttered, chewing on her thumbnail. That scarred guy with the bone blade looks like he eats mutants for breakfast. And the kid, whatever he is, even Hyun-soo is deferring to him. They are assets, Ian Yu. But assets must be controlled, Ian Hayek said, tapping a pencil against his clipboard. If they can be reasoned with, we use them to clear the surface routes. If they cannot, we vent the quarantine room with carbon monoxide. Before Ian Yu could react to her brother's ruthless pragmatism, the pencil in Ian Hayek's hand violently snapped. The entire bunker shook. It wasn't the rhythmic, horizontal vibration of a surface tremor. It was a massive, concussive impact coming directly from below their feet. The dim fluorescent lights hanging from the ceiling flickered and exploded in showers of sparks. Screams erupted from the civilian tents in the main concourse. What was that? Ian Yu yelled, jumping to her feet. Ian Hayek's eyes widened, his calculations rapidly falling apart. The lower perimeter sensors didn't trip. Whatever it is, it bypassed the reinforced tunnels completely. KRKR Cruum. The concrete floor in the center of the main concourse violently buckled upward, cracking like a brittle eggshell. Hyun-soo. Ian Hayek bellowed, dropping his clipboard. In the quarantine cell, Hyun-soo's head snapped toward the noise. The half-blood didn't wait for Ian Hayek to open the cell. He stepped back, his massive skeletal wing flaring out, and violently smashed through the reinforced concrete wall of the quarantine room as if it were drywall. Sang-wook and Ju-won grabbed their weapons and poured out of the dust behind him. In the center of the civilian encampment, the floor had completely caved in. A massive, gaping sinkhole led straight down into the black abyss of the earth. And erupting from that sinkhole was a monstrosity of unfathomable scale. Alert, Siege Class Apex Predator detected. Monster type, the Gordrill, desire, to unearth the hidden, warning, entity is encased in diamond-hard bio-armor. Avoid the mandibles. It looked like a colossal, mutated earthworm, easily 20 feet wide. But its head was a nightmare of biomechanical evolution. Its maw was composed of 4 massive, interlocking, serrated mandibles forged from abyssal bone, rotating at terrifying speeds like an organic tunnel-boring machine. The grinding of its jaws sounded like a dozen chainsaws running simultaneously. The Gordrill let out a deafening, vibrating shriek that shattered the remaining glass in the subway station. It hadn't come alone. Pouring out of the sinkhole alongside the massive beast were hundreds of smaller, parasitic spawn humanoid creatures covered in hardened dirt and bone, wielding jagged claws designed for digging through flesh. "Defend the civilians!" Ian Hayek roared, drawing a heavy handgun and firing into the swarm. The coalition guards opened fire, the concourse erupting into a chaotic symphony of gunfire and screams. But the bullets simply bounced off the Gordrill's thick, armored hide. The colossal beast swung its rotating, chainsaw-like head, instantly obliterating a reinforced concrete pillar and shredding a heavy barricade, sending coalition guards flying like ragdolls. "Hey, ugly!" Sang-wook roared. The scarred brawler didn't run away. He charged directly toward the sinkhole. Sang-wook leaped into the air, bringing the massive executioner's bone blade down with a bone-shattering roar. The blade struck the Gordrill's thick armored hide. It didn't bounce off like the bullets, but it only managed to carve a shallow, bleeding gash. The monster was too heavily armored. The Gordrill violently thrashed, its massive body swatting Sang-wook out of the air. The brawler crashed into the wall, coughing up blood. Hyun-soo stepped in, his right arm erupting into the massive, red-hot blades of biomatter. "Get everyone back!" the half-blood screamed. Hyun-soo lunged, driving his searing blades directly toward one of the beast's rotating mandibles. The heat melted the bone, but the sheer kinetic torque of the spinning drill head caught Hyun-soo's arm, violently throwing the half-blood across the concourse. "It's too heavily armored!" Ju-won yelled, picking up a massive chunk of concrete and hurling it at the beast's head, only for the rotating mandibles to instantly grind the rock into dust. "We need heavy ordnance." Ian Hayek, retreating toward the heavy blast doors, gritted his teeth. "We don't have anything that can pierce that armor. We have to abandon the lower level." "We can't!" Ian Yu screamed, firing her crossbow into a parasite's eye. "There are too many people. The stairs are choked." The Gordrill reared its massive head back, preparing to drive its rotating mandibles directly into the ceiling to collapse the entire bunker and bury them all alive. Inside the ruined quarantine cell, surrounded by the chaos and the deafening roar of the monster, the pitch-black digital void inside Sebastian's mind finally flashed a brilliant, blinding blue. Biological reconstruction, 100%. Metamorphosis complete. System reboot successful. Pain nullification, active. Sebastian's eyes snapped open. He didn't gasp for air. He didn't scream. The agonizing heat that had been cooking his body vanished, replaced by an icy, absolute clarity. He slowly sat up on the cot. He looked down at his right arm. From the outside, it looked human, though the metallic sheen of his thermal carapace was more pronounced. But beneath the skin, running along his radius and ulna, deep, pulsing veins of dark, liquid iron glowed with a terrifying, magnetic resonance. His hand felt incredibly heavy, yet he moved it with effortless, frictionless grace. New passive skill acquired, Iron Marrow. Host's right limb is completely infused with compressed ferromagnetic energy. Capable of channeling catastrophic kinetic and magnetic force without biological recoil. Outside, the Gordrill roared, lunging upward to shatter the ceiling. Sebastian stepped out of the ruined quarantine cell. "Everyone, down," a voice cut through the deafening noise of the drill. It was a voice devoid of panic, cold and sharp as a scalpel. Ian Hayek, Sang-wook, Ju-won, and Hyun-soo turned. Sebastian was walking through the panicked crowd. His Right eye was no longer swollen shut, it burned with a cold, predatory focus. The blue fissures on his skin had vanished, leaving behind a perfectly fortified, metallic-sheened predator. Active skill, void step engaged. Sebastian vanished from their sight. He didn't run. He bypassed friction entirely, appearing directly in midair in front of the colossal, rotating mandibles of the Gordrill. The massive beast shrieked, driving its chainsaw forward to grind the arrogant human into a bloody mist. Sebastian didn't dodge. He pulled his newly reconstructed right fist back. Active skill, gravitational anchor engaged. Active skill, ferromagnetic resonance engaged. Active skill, kinetic detonation engaged. He triggered them all at once. The system didn't flash a warning. The iron marrow inside his arm perfectly insulated his cellular structure from the catastrophic overload. Sebastian drove his right fist directly into the dead center of the rotating, diamond-hard mandibles. The collision defied physics. The localized kinetic explosion was magnified exponentially by the raw magnetic force of the iron marrow. A blinding, localized shockwave erupted from Sebastian's knuckles. The sound vanished, sucked into the vacuum of the impact. Then, the Gordrill simply stopped. The diamond-hard mandibles didn't just break, they completely disintegrated. The catastrophic kinetic force traveled directly down the length of the colossal beast's armored body. The massive, 20-foot-thick worm violently expanded, its biological armor shattering from the inside out. With a sickening, thunderous boom, the entire upper half of the siege-class monster was pulverized into a shower of black rain and shattered bone. The headless, mangled remains of the massive beast collapsed backward into the sinkhole, dead before it even hit the bottom. The smaller parasites, sensing the instantaneous, horrifying death of their apex, immediately turned and scrambled back down into the dark, screeching in pure terror. Sebastian dropped gracefully from the air, landing silently on the edge of the gaping sinkhole. He slowly stood up, uncurling his right fist. Smoke poured off his knuckles. But the skin was perfectly intact. There was no broken bone. No recoil. Just absolute, devastating power. The entire bunker was dead silent. Ian Hayek's jaw had actually dropped. Sang-wook stared at the headless corpse of the beast, then at the teenager. Target defeated. Bonus, Siege Class Apex slain. Extracting core ability, Sebastian ignored the blue text. He turned slowly, his icy gaze sweeping over the shocked coalition guards, past Hyun-soo, and finally locking onto the pragmatic leader in the trench coat, Lee Ian-hyuk. "I'm awake," Sebastian said, his voice echoing coldly through the ruined bunker. "Now, let's talk about my quarantine." Chapter 36, The Architect's Echo and the Cold Truth. The silence that followed the Gordrill's annihilation was not the silence of relief, it was the suffocating quiet of absolute terror. Lee Ian-hyuk stood amidst the swirling dust of the destroyed concourse, his clipboard hanging loosely from his fingers. The pragmatism that had been his armor for a year of apocalypse had been shattered along with the Gordrill's mandibles. He looked at the mangled, headless corpse in the sinkhole, then at Sebastian, whose right arm was still wreathed in a faint, residual hum of magnetic ozone. "You?" Ian-hyuk began, his voice failing him. He cleared his throat, trying to regain the cold, detached veneer of the coalition leader. "You pulverized a siege-class threat with a single strike. That level of kinetic output it's statistically impossible." Sebastian didn't answer. He didn't even look at Ian-hyuk. He walked past the coalition leader as if he were a ghost, his abyssal cartography scanning the bunker. Passive skill, abyssal cartography active. Notice, structural integrity of the bunker is compromised. Subsurface tunnels are actively shifting. The ground is moving again, Sebastian said, stopping near the sinkhole. He placed his left hand against the concrete wall. He could feel it, the deep, rhythmic vibrations of the labyrinth far beneath the coalition's feet. You think you're safe down here, but you're just sitting on a coiled spring. The architect isn't dead. He's regrouping. The architect. Hyen-Su stepped forward, his skeletal wing retracted, his red eyes narrowed in confusion. Who is that? We've been fighting the Desire Eaters for a year. We haven't heard of anyone named the architect. Sebastian turned to look at the half-blood. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. The world ended a year ago. During that year, the architect had been busy. While they were trapped in the falling city, the architect had been harvesting the earth, using the desires of the survivors to build his labyrinthine metropolis. The monsters you've been fighting for a year, Sebastian said, his voice cold and heavy. They aren't just roaming predators. They're building something. They're carving the city into a machine. And if you think the labyrinth stopped because I broke the clock, you aren't paying attention to the ash. He gestured toward the ceiling. A single flake of violet ash drifted down from a crack in the concrete. The ash isn't just fallout, Sebastian continued. It's a conductor. It's been falling for a year. It's saturating the soil, the water, the very air you breathe. Every single person in this bunker, every single thing you touch is being wired into a massive, global network. Yu stepped forward, her face pale. A network? To what end? Sebastian didn't answer her. He walked over to the Gordrill's mangled corpse. He reached into the shredded, armored meat and pulled out a jagged, pulsating core of violet, crystallized bone. It was still thrumming with a faint, rhythmic frequency. He held the core out toward Ian Hyuk. Touch it, Sebastian commanded. I won't, Ian Hyuk spat. Touch it, or I'll crush this bunker's support pillars and see how you like the surface, Sebastian threatened, his ferromagnetic resonance spiking. The ceiling began to groan. Ian Hyuk, realizing he had absolutely no leverage, gingerly reached out and touched the crystal. The moment his skin contacted the bone core, Ian Hyuk's eyes rolled back in his head. He gasped. His body stiffening. He wasn't being attacked, he was being connected. I see it, Ian Hyuk whispered, his voice trembling with a horrific clarity. The whole city. The tunnels. The surface ruins. They're all nodes. They're all vibrating at the same frequency. It's not just a city. It's an antenna. It's calling something down. Ian Hyuk pulled his hand away, collapsing to the floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. It's not just a labyrinth. It's a receiver. The architect isn't hiding. He's waiting for the harvest to reach critical mass. How much time? Sang-wook demanded, looming over the coalition leader. The resonance is already at 90%, Ian Hyuk stammered, pointing at the map on the corkboard. When it hits 100, the tuning completes. The entire city will stop being a labyrinth and become a bridge. Something is coming through. Sebastian looked up at the ceiling, his abyssal cartography sensing the thickening density of the ash clouds above. The sky was no longer just bruised, it was beginning to warp, the reality above soul thinning like cheap fabric. We're not just fighting for survival anymore, Sebastian said, his gaze shifting to Hyen-Su, Ju-won, and Sang-wook. We're a glitch in the architect's system. And he's going to send everything he has to scrub us. Suddenly, the bunker's internal alarms, a series of scavenged, rusted sirens began to blare. Perimeter breach, a voice screamed over the coalition's radio. The tunnels. They're everywhere. Thousands of them. The tenders, Hyen-Su whispered, his blades of biomatter igniting. They aren't here to capture us. They're here to erase us. Sebastian took a breath, his iron marrow arm humming with static. He didn't look tired anymore. He looked like a weapon that had finally found its target. Ian Hyuk, Sebastian said, his voice cold. Open the blast doors. If you want to survive, you're going to need a reaper. Sebastian walked toward the tunnel entrance, his abyssal bone scythe in his left hand and his iron-infused fist in his right. He didn't care about the bunker. He didn't care about the politics of the coalition. He was going to find the source of the resonance, and he was going to rip it out of the ground, no matter what gods or monsters stood in his way. Hyunsu, Sebastian called back over his shoulder. Are you coming, or are you going to keep waiting for the end? Hyunsu didn't answer. He simply flared his massive skeletal wing, the sharp bone tips carving deep gouges into the concrete floor. The two apex predators turned toward the dark, shrieking tunnel, ready to meet the coming tide. Chapter 37, The Violet Tide and the Engine of Ruin. The heavy, rusted blast doors of the Green Home Coalition bunker screamed as the hydraulic gears struggled to pull them apart. Even before the gap was wide enough for a man to step through, the sound of the approaching swarm spilled into the concourse. It didn't sound like a stampede of animals. It sounded like a massive, churning industrial grinder chewing through glass and steel. Sebastian stood motionless, his stance relaxed but his muscles coiled like high-tension wire. Beside him, Cha Hyunsu exhaled a long, trembling breath. The half-blood's right arm was already transformed, the jagged obsidian flesh glowing with intense, fiery red heat, while the colossal skeletal wing on his back twitched with predatory anticipation. Behind them, Jang Ju-won wrapped his massive hands in torn strips of fabric, and Paiyan Sang-wook rested the heavy, triangular bone blade on his scarred shoulder. Ian Hyuk. Sebastian called out, never taking his eyes off the widening gap in the blast doors. The second we clear the threshold, you seal this door and you weld it shut. Do not open it for anything. Ian Hyuk, standing safely behind a secondary barricade with his crossbow-wielding sister, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. And how exactly do you plan on getting back in? We aren't coming back, Sebastian replied coldly. The blast doors finally locked open with a heavy, metallic clang. The pitch-black subway tunnel was no longer dark. It was illuminated by a terrifying, undulating wave of blinding violet light. The tenders had arrived. They were not the chaotic, mutated desire eaters of the past. These entities were biomechanical perfection, designed by the architect for a single purpose: eradication. They were roughly the size of wolves, but their bodies were composed entirely of interlocking shards of black iron and sharp, translucent violet crystal. They possessed no faces, no mouths, and no vocal cords. They moved in absolute, terrifying silence, an ocean of jagged geometric shapes flowing over the floor, walls, and ceiling. Alert, eradication swarm detected. Monster type, the fractal tenders, origin, architect's forge, warning, entities possess adaptive armor. They will share kinetic and thermal data across the swarm to neutralize threats. Silent but deadly, Sang-wook grunted, spitting on the floor. My favorite. The wave of violet crystal and black iron surged forward, pouring into the bunker's entrance like a flood. I'll take the walls. Hyunsu roared. The half-blood launched himself forward. A blur of sorrow and rage. He didn't just run, he vaulted off the bunker walls, his skeletal wing violently carving deep trenches into the concrete. He dove headfirst into the sea of tenders crawling along the ceiling. His red-hot biomatter blades cleaved through the first line of monsters. The violet crystals shattered, exploding into showers of razor-sharp shrapnel, but Hyunsu didn't flinch. He spun like a localized typhoon, the intense heat of his mutated arm flash melting the black iron of their bodies before they could adapt. On the ground, Sebastian stepped over the threshold, directly into the path of the incoming tidal wave. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need one. Passive skill, iron marrow active. Active skill, ferromagnetic resonance engaged. Sebastian raised his right hand. The dark, liquid iron infused within his bones began to hum, emitting a blinding white magnetic field. He didn't punch the swarm. He grabbed the very environment they were crawling on. Through his magnetic field, Sebastian locked onto the thousands of rusted iron rebar rods buried deep within the concrete floor and walls of the tunnel. "Erupt," Sebastian whispered. He violently clenched his right fist and pulled upward. The concrete tunnel physically exploded. Thousands of jagged, rusted iron spears violently erupted from the floor and walls over a 50-yard stretch. The catastrophic ambush instantly impaled hundreds of the fractal tenders, pinning their biomechanical bodies mid-air like a gruesome, metallic forest. "Clear the stragglers," Sebastian ordered, not missing a beat. Ju-1 and Sang-wook charged into the iron forest Sebastian had just created. Sang-wook was a juggernaut. He swung his massive bone blade like a scythe, completely shattering the violet crystals of any tender that managed to break free of the rebar. Ju-1 fought with ruthless, brutal efficiency. When a tender lunged at him, the immortal man didn't dodge. He let the crystal spikes pierce his massive forearms, using the monster's own momentum to grab it and crush its core with his bare hands, his flesh healing the moment the beast died. "They're adapting!" Hyun-soo yelled from the ceiling, kicking a melted tender away. The blue system screen in Sebastian's vision flashed a warning. "Swarm adaptation, 40%. Notice, the tenders are shifting their crystalline structure to resist extreme heat and magnetic polarity." The violet light in the tunnel suddenly shifted to a deep, angry crimson. The remaining thousands of tenders stopped pouring forward. Instead, they began to rapidly climb on top of one another, fusing their iron bodies and crystal limbs together. They were building a wall. "They're not trying to breach the bunker anymore," Ian Hayek shouted from behind the closing blast doors. "They're trying to seal you in the tunnel. They're going to bury you alive so the tuning can finish." The massive, fused barricade of thousands of tenders completely blocked the subway tunnel, growing thicker and denser by the second. The walls of the tunnel groaned under the immense, expanding pressure of the biomechanical blockade. "They want to lock us in the dark." Sebastian's eyes narrowed, his left hand gripping the handle of his abyssal bone scythe. "Let's see how they handle the light." Sebastian turned to the half-blood. "Hyun-soo, get down here. We're not going through the tunnel. We're going up." Hyun-soo dropped from the ceiling, his breathing heavy, steam rising from his red-hot blades. "Up? We're 50 feet. Underground, beneath a 4-lane highway. And I have an arm made of localized catastrophes," Sebastian replied, his face a mask of absolute, chilling confidence. Sebastian lowered his center of gravity, planting his boots firmly into the cracked concrete. He looked up at the ceiling of the subway tunnel, directly above where the massive blockade of tenders was forming. Active skill, gravitational anchor engaged. Active skill, seismic tremor engaged. Active skill, kinetic detonation engaged. "Stand behind me!" Sebastian roared over the grinding screech of the fusing monsters. Ju-1, Sang-wook, and Hyun-soo scrambled behind Sebastian as the teenager pulled his right fist back down to his waist. The iron marrow inside his arm glowed so brightly it was visible through his skin, containing the cataclysmic energy that would have completely vaporized a normal human arm. The air pressure in the tunnel dropped drastically as all kinetic energy in the immediate vicinity was sucked into Sebastian's fist. The massive, fused wall of fractal tenders surged forward, a tidal wave of crimson crystal and black iron threatening to crush them against the bunker doors. Sebastian didn't punch the swarm. He drove his right fist straight up into the solid concrete ceiling of the subway tunnel. Krrr boom. The impact was apocalyptic. The shockwave didn't just shatter the ceiling, it reversed gravity. A massive, concentrated pillar of sheer kinetic force erupted upward. The 50 feet of solid earth, bedrock, steel pipes, and the 4-lane asphalt highway above them were instantly vaporized. The explosion blew a colossal, 30-foot wide crater completely through the surface of the world, letting the bruised, violet light of the toxic sky pour down into the subterranean dark. The catastrophic shockwave blew the massive wall of tenders backward, shattering their fused forms into millions of harmless, dead shards. The blast was so powerful it created a localized vacuum, violently sucking Sebastian, Hyunsu, Ju-won, and Sang-wook upward through the massive vertical shaft like leaves caught in a hurricane. They soared through the air, breaking the surface, and crashed heavily onto the ruined, ash-covered asphalt of the destroyed highway above. Sebastian landed gracefully on one knee, his right arm smoking, the iron marrow humming with satisfaction. The others scrambled to their feet, coughing up the thick, violet ash that choked the air. They had escaped the subterranean trap. They were back on the surface of the ruined soul. But as the dust settled, the absolute horror of the architect's design was finally revealed. The city was no longer just overgrown with biomechanical veins. The skyscrapers had physically moved. Entire city blocks had been uprooted and dragged by colossal, underground forces, rearranging the ruins of Seoul into a massive, perfect, geometric circle. And in the dead center of the ruined city, towering high into the swirling, violent clouds of the abyssal sky, was a colossal structure that defied human comprehension. It was a massive ring of pale, floating bone, easily a mile in diameter, suspended horizontally over the financial district. Pulsing streams of pure, violent violet energy, the harvested desires of millions of dead humans, were being funneled from the city below directly into the floating ring. The air itself vibrated with a deafening, low-frequency hum. The tuning. Critical alert, resonance at 98%. Warning, the abyssal bridge is stabilizing. Dimensional integrity is failing. My God, Ju-won whispered, his eyes wide with profound dread as he stared at it. The colossal ring in the sky. It's a stargate. Not a gate, Sebastian corrected, his right fist clenching as he stared up at the swirling vortex forming in the center of the bone. Ring. It's a doorway. And the architect is about to open it. Hyunsu's red-hot blades ignited, the sorrow in his eyes replaced by a burning, suicidal resolve. Then we break the door. Before they could take a single step toward the center of the city, the violet ash falling around them suddenly stopped mid-air. A smooth, cultured voice, perfectly clear and devoid of any distance, echoed directly into their minds. You broke my clock in the abyss, anomaly, the architect's voice whispered, thick with malice and cosmic power. But you are far too late to stop the engine of ruin. From the shadows of the ruined skyscrapers surrounding them, a dozen figures stepped out onto the highway. They were perfectly human in appearance, wearing immaculate crimson suits, and their faces were covered in pristine, featureless porcelain masks. The architect hadn't just sent hounds to intercept them. He had sent pieces of himself. Chapter 38, The Porcelain Echoes and the Shattered Gravity. The suspended violet ash hung in the air like a frozen snowstorm. The ruined four-lane highway was dead silent, save for the deafening, low-frequency hum radiating from the colossal bone ring in the sky above. Standing in a perfect semicircle blocking the path to the city center were 12 figures. They were identical immaculate crimson suits, pristine porcelain masks, and an aura of absolute, crushing spatial pressure. They were not the architect in his entirety, but fragments of his will, downloaded into physical avatars to protect the engine of ruin. 12 gods for the price of one, Paiyan Sang-wook growled, gripping the executioner's heavy bone blade with both hands. He spat a wad of blood onto the asphalt. I like those odds. The 12 architect avatars tilted their porcelain faces in unison. "You are a localized error," the 12 voices echoed simultaneously in the minds of the survivors. It was a suffocating chorus of cultured, cosmic malice. "The system is simply running a correction protocol." Zhang Juwan didn't wait for the system to finish its sentence. With a roar that shook the ruined cars around them, the immortal man charged. He didn't use a weapon, he became a siege engine of raw muscle and regenerative fury. He closed the gap to the center avatar in a heartbeat, throwing a massive right hook aimed directly at the featureless mask. The avatar didn't dodge. It simply raised a gloved hand. Crack! The kinetic impact was instantly nullified. The avatar caught Juwon's fist, the spatial pressure wrapping around the immortal man's arm. With a casual flick of its wrist, the avatar twisted. Juwon's entire right arm violently spiraled, the bones shattering and tearing through the flesh. "Is that all?" Juwon bellowed, completely ignoring the agonizing trauma. Instead of retreating, Juwon lunged forward, driving his forehead directly into the avatar's porcelain mask. The sheer physical grit caught the entity off guard. The mask cracked, and the avatar stumbled backward. "Move!" Cha Hyun-soo roared, vaulting over Juwon's shoulder. The half-blood's massive skeletal wing snapped open, propelling him forward like a dark missile. His right arm, morphed into 6-foot, red-hot blades of biomatter, cleaved through the air. Two avatars raised their hands, attempting to crush Hyun-soo with invisible spatial barriers. Hyun-soo's red-hot blades met the invisible barriers. The air shrieked, sparks of violet energy erupting as the intense heat and raw biological power of the half-blood began to literally melt through the spatial distortions. "I've got your flank, kid!" Sang-wook yelled, charging the distracted avatars. He swung the massive triangular bone blade in a brutal horizontal arc. The weapon, forged from an apex predator, sliced cleanly through the crimson suit of the nearest avatar, completely bisecting the entity. But there was no blood. The bisected avatar instantly dissolved into a violent explosion of pure, volatile purple cosmic energy. Boom! The concussive force threw Sang-wook backward, sliding across the asphalt. Alert! Abyssal echoes detected. Warning! Entities do not possess biological anatomy. Upon structural failure, entities will detonate their stored cosmic energy. They're suicide bombers. Sang-wook coughed, pushing himself up. 3 more avatars immediately blurred, bypassing the melee and materializing directly in front of Sebastian. They raised their hands in perfect synchronization, their palms aimed at the teenager's chest. Space itself began to fold around Sebastian, the gravity increasing tenfold in an attempt to crush him into a microscopic singularity. The asphalt beneath his boots instantly vaporized under the pressure. But Sebastian didn't bend. His fortified skeletal structure groaned, but the iron marrow in his right arm pulsed with an icy, undeniable defiance. Passive skill, iron marrow active. Active skill, gravitational anchor. Engaged. Sebastian spiked his mass, completely negating their spatial crush. "You're just fragments," Sebastian whispered coldly. He didn't use his fists. He reached to his back with his left hand and gripped the handle of the massive abyssal bone scythe. He swung the weapon forward, transferring it seamlessly into his reconstructed right hand. The moment his fingers closed around the handle, the dark, liquid iron inside his arm surged. The ferromagnetic resonance didn't just stay in his body, it flooded into the hypercalcified bone of the scythe, turning the weapon into a massively charged, kinetic rail blade. Active skill, void step engaged. Sebastian vanished from the center of the gravity well. He reappeared directly behind the 3 avatars. Frictionless, he spun on his heel, using the violent torque of his 500% enhanced strength combined with the terrifying magnetic weight of the iron marrow. He swung the charged bone scythe in a wide, sweeping arc. The blade didn't just cut through the air, it tore a visible, distorted rift in the atmosphere. The heavy scythe cleaved seamlessly through the necks of all three avatars at once. Before their bodies could detonate, Sebastian triggered the scythe's charge. Active skill, kinetic detonation engaged. The localized explosion erupted directly from the blade of the scythe, violently blowing the cosmic energy of the avatars outward, harmlessly dispersing the volatile purple explosions away from the group. 3 dead. 9 left. Don't let them group up, Sebastian ordered, spinning the massive scythe to clear the residual cosmic smoke. But the remaining avatars were learning. The architect's hive mind instantly adapted. Correction protocol updated, the 9 remaining voices echoed. They didn't attack physically. The 9 avatars suddenly levitated 10 feet into the air, joining hands in a massive circle above the ruined highway. The porcelain masks looked down at the survivors. The low-frequency hum of the massive bone ring in the sky violently spiked. They're linking to the sky gate. Hyun-soo yelled, his red eyes widening as he felt the atmospheric pressure drop. Critical alert, resonance network synchronizing. Warning, resonance at 99%. Dimensional integrity is shattering. The avatars weren't trying to fight anymore. They were acting as living cosmic batteries, sacrificing themselves to force the final percentage of the tuning. The violet light in the sky turned blinding. The 9 avatars began to dissolve, their bodies converting entirely into massive beams of raw violet energy that shot directly upward into the colossal, floating bone ring. Stop them! Ju-won roared, his right arm fully healed, hurling a massive chunk of concrete at the hovering entities. But the rock simply disintegrated upon touching the beams of light. Sebastian threw his right hand forward, desperately trying to grip the iron in the surrounding buildings to crush the avatars, but it was too late. The avatars completely dissolved. The beams connected with the massive ring in the sky. Boom! A sound that defied human. Hearing a cosmic tolling of a bell that vibrated the marrow in their bones shook the earth. The blue system screen in front of Sebastian turned violently red. System failure. Resonance at 100%. The abyssal bridge is open. The massive bone ring in the sky ignited. The center of the ring, previously an empty circle, violently tore open, revealing a swirling, infinite vortex of pitch-black nothingness, framed by violent, lightning-streaked purple clouds. It was a direct door to the deepest layer of the abyss. And it was hungry. Hold on to something! Sebastian roared at the top of his lungs, driving his bone scythe deep into the solid concrete of the highway. Gravity on the surface of Seoul completely shattered. It wasn't zero gravity. It was inverted gravity. The immense, terrifying pull of the abyssal bridge kicked in, treating the sky as the floor. The ruined skyscrapers of the financial district began to groan and snap. Millions of tons of glass, steel, and biomechanical flesh ripped free from the earth and began to fall upward into the sky. Cars, buses, and chunks of the highway were violently sucked toward the colossal vortex in the clouds. Sang-wook yelled as his boots left the ground, desperately grabbing onto the exposed rebar of the highway. Ju-won slammed his massive fists directly into the asphalt, anchoring himself through sheer, brute strength. Hyun-soo was yanked into the air, but the half-blood flared his massive skeletal wing, fighting against the impossible draft. Diving downward to grab Sang-wook's belt before the scarred fighter could be pulled into the sky. Sebastian held on to his bone scythe, his legs dangling in the air as the violent, inverted gravity tried to rip him off the planet. He looked up. The ruined city of Seoul was being completely dismantled, falling piece by piece into the swirling black vortex of the bridge. The architect is on the other side of that door, Sebastian gritted his teeth, his metallic skin glowing as the iron marrow fought. The strain. If we stay here, the planet gets ripped apart. Hyen-Su shouted over the deafening roar of the inverted hurricane, struggling to hold. Sang-wook. Sebastian looked at the massive chunks of skyscrapers and highway floating rapidly upward, creating a chaotic, debris-filled pathway directly into the vortex. The cold calculation returned to Sebastian's eye. There was no running. There was no hiding in a bunker. Then we don't stay here, Sebastian said, his voice terrifyingly calm despite the apocalypse. He looked at Hyen-Su, Ju-won, and Sang-wook. Get ready to jump, Sebastian ordered, ripping his scythe out of the concrete. Before the others could protest, Sebastian let go of the earth. He allowed the violent, inverted gravity to claim him, falling upward into the broken sky, riding the ruins of the world straight into the maw of the abyss. Chapter 39, The Upward Fall and the Gravity Graveyard. Falling upward was a physical paradox that tore at the inner ear and scrambled the senses. Sebastian didn't just drift, he plummeted toward the sky. The violent, inverted gravity of the abyssal bridge was a cosmic vacuum cleaner, tearing the ruined city of Seoul apart block by block. Around him, massive slabs of asphalt, overturned buses, and entire floors of shattered skyscrapers were hurtling toward the swirling black vortex framed by the colossal bone ring. The wind shrieked like a dying animal, tearing at Sebastian's clothes. He was in a literal ocean of floating debris, navigating a high-speed, vertical asteroid field. Incoming, a voice roared over the chaotic gale. Sebastian looked up, or rather, toward the vortex. A massive, spinning chunk of a reinforced concrete overpass was hurtling directly toward him, accelerating rapidly in the slipstream. Sebastian didn't try to dodge. In this environment, a wrong move would send him drifting into the empty void. Active skill, gravitational anchor engaged. Sebastian spiked his mass for a fraction of a second, intentionally dropping his upward velocity just enough to let the spinning overpass fly past him. As the jagged edge of the concrete zipped by, he threw his left hand out, grabbing the exposed rebar. His arm socket popped, the immense torque threatening to rip his shoulder out, but his hypercalcified bones held. He hoisted himself onto the flat surface of the falling overpass, effectively surfing the massive slab of concrete straight up into the sky. A heavy, bone-jarring thud rattled the concrete. Jang Ju-won landed on the other end of the overpass, his massive boots crushing the stone. The immortal man had simply jumped from a floating bus to get here. A second later, Cha Hyen-Su dropped from the sky, his massive skeletal wing acting as a perfect glider in the chaotic updrafts. He held Pai-Yin Sang-wook by the collar of his jacket, dropping the scarred fighter roughly onto the concrete. "I hate flying," Sang-wook groaned, clutching his stomach and gripping his triangular bone blade tightly. "Next time, let me walk." "There is no floor left to walk on," Hyen-Su yelled over the wind, pointing down at the earth. The sight was apocalyptic. The financial district of Seoul was gone, replaced by a massive, perfectly circular crater. The earth looked like an apple with a massive bite taken out of it. "We're getting close to the ring," Ju-won shouted, bracing himself against the wind. They were less than half a mile from the colossal bone ring. The violet energy pulsing through the structure was so intense it made their skin prickle with static electricity. The pitch-black vortex in the center was completely lightless, an absolute void that promised nothing but cosmic annihilation. But they weren't the only things caught in the upward draft. The abyssal bridge was indiscriminate. It was pulling everything into the sky, including the apex predators that had been hiding deep within the ruins of the city. A shadow eclipsed the violent violet light. Sebastian looked up. Tumbling through the air, directly between them and the vortex, was a monstrosity that had likely been hibernating at the very bottom of the Han River. It was a Leviathan-class entity, easily the size of a nuclear submarine. Its body was a writhing mass of slick, black, biomechanical tentacles, heavily armored with thick, rust-covered steel plating resembling a sunken battleship. It had no eyes, only a massive, circular maw lined with thousands of rotating, translucent teeth. Critical alert, abyssal dredge detected. Monster type, the Deep Walker, origin, the sunken sector, warning, entity is highly aggressive. Its tentacles secrete a paralyzing neurotoxin. The massive beast was disoriented by the anti-gravity, blindly thrashing its colossal tentacles, smashing floating skyscrapers to dust. It's blocking the gate. Sang-wook roared, raising his bone blade. It's panicking, Hyun-soo noted, his red eyes tracking the frantic movements. It's going to crush this overpass if it thrashes this way. As if on cue, the Deep Walker sensed the kinetic vibration of their concrete slab. Two massive, steel-plated tentacles, thick as redwood trees, whipped out from the writhing mass, shooting directly toward them. Ju-won. Left. Sebastian commanded, his iron marrow arm beginning to hum with raw magnetic power. Ju-won didn't hesitate. The immortal man charged toward the edge of the floating overpass. As the left tentacle slammed down, threatening to shatter their concrete raft, Ju-won caught it in a bear hug. The sheer kinetic impact shattered Ju-won's ribs, and the neurotoxin instantly began to burn his skin, but his supernatural regeneration fought it to a standstill. With a primal roar, Ju-won used his impossible strength to physically hold the multi-ton tentacle in place. Sang-wook seized the opening. The brawler sprinted up the immobilized tentacle like a ramp. Nearing the base, he swung the massive executioner's bone blade in a devastating, downward strike, cleanly severing the thick appendage. Black, acidic blood erupted into the anti-gravity, floating as deadly, sizzling spheres in the air. But the right tentacle was already coming down directly at Sebastian and Hyun-soo. Hyun-soo's arm erupted into searing, red-hot blades of biomatter. "I'll melt it." "No," Sebastian said coldly, placing his left hand on Hyun-soo's shoulder to stop him. "We don't need to kill it. We need it to give us a push." Sebastian stepped to the very edge of the concrete overpass. He didn't dodge the incoming, massive steel-plated tentacle. Passive skill, iron marrow active. Active skill, ferromagnetic resonance engaged. Sebastian raised his right fist. The magnetic field he generated wasn't a push or a pull. It was an absolute lock. He synchronized his magnetic field perfectly with the rusted steel plating on the monster's incoming tentacle. When the colossal limb struck, it didn't crush Sebastian. The magnetic fields violently repelled each other with the force of a localized meteor strike. The kinetic feedback was catastrophic. The Deep Walker shrieked as the immense magnetic repulsion violently threw its massive, submarine-sized body backward, completely clearing it out of the direct path to the vortex. But the recoil on Sebastian's end was equally massive. The concrete overpass they were standing on instantly shattered into a million pieces under the pressure. "Brace yourselves!" Sebastian roared. With their raft destroyed, they were thrown back into the violent, unprotected slipstream of the vortex. The upward velocity violently spiked. The G-force was crushing, pinning their arms to their sides as they rocketed toward the pitch-black maw of the abyssal bridge. "We're crossing the threshold!" Hyun-soo yelled, his voice barely audible over the roaring cosmic wind. They shot through the center of the colossal bone ring. The transition was violent and instantaneous. The screeching wind, the floating debris, the bruised violet sky of Earth, all of it vanished the millisecond they crossed into the black hole. Total sensory deprivation hit them. There was no sound, no light, no gravity, and no air. It felt like being submerged in freezing, absolute nothingness. Sebastian's lungs screamed for oxygen, but his thermal carapace and fortified skeleton locked down, preserving his internal systems in the vacuum. For 10 agonizing seconds, they drifted in the void between dimensions. Then, the void shattered. They were violently spat out onto a solid surface. Gravity returned to normal downward with bone-crushing suddenness. Sebastian hit a polished, impossibly smooth floor, rolling to absorb the impact. Ju-1 crashed nearby with a heavy grunt, while Hyun-Soo used his skeletal wing to gracefully land, catching Sang-wook before the brawler could snap his neck on the descent. Sebastian slowly pushed himself up to a knee, coughing, his lungs desperately pulling in air. The air tasted sterile, metallic, and incredibly old. He opened his eyes. They weren't in a ruined city. They weren't in a dark, twisted labyrinth. They were standing in an endless, pristine expanse of pure, blinding white marble. The floor was so polished it perfectly reflected them, stretching endlessly in all directions without a single wall, pillar, or ceiling in sight. It was a domain of absolute, terrifying perfection. There was no sound. Not even the echo of their own breathing seemed to travel in this space. But 50 yards in front of them, sitting alone in the endless white expanse, was a solitary, high-backed chair carved from smooth obsidian. Sitting in the chair was a figure. It wasn't wearing a porcelain mask or a crimson suit. It was a perfectly normal-looking human male, dressed in a simple white linen shirt and dark trousers. His hands rested steepled in his lap, and his eyes completely pitch black, devoid of sclera or irises, were locked directly onto Sebastian. The blue system screen didn't glitch this time. It appeared with perfect, terrifying clarity. Domain reached, the core of the abyss. Entity, the architect, true form, ... Warning, all active and passive skills are currently disabled. Sebastian tried to flex his right hand. The iron marrow didn't hum. The magnetic field didn't respond. His echolocation was dead. He was just a boy with metal skin standing before a god. The architect smiled, a gentle, welcoming expression that was infinitely more terrifying than any monster's roar. "Welcome, anomaly," the architect's voice spoke, not in their minds, but vibrating directly out of the perfect white marble beneath their feet. "Please, take a seat. We have so much to discuss about your termination." Chapter 40, The White Room and the Dead Weight. The pristine white marble floor was completely flawless, reflecting the survivors like a frozen, horizontal mirror. There was no horizon, no sky, and no walls, only an infinite, sterile expanse that felt heavier than the crushing depths of the ocean. Sebastian stood motionless, his metallic sheen skin suddenly feeling terrifyingly cold. The blue system interface had vanished. For the first time since the apocalypse began, his mind was entirely quiet. But it wasn't a peaceful silence, it was the horrifying realization of profound vulnerability. The icy, calculating buffer of his pain nullification was gone. A sudden, agonizing throb erupted in his right shoulder where the socket had nearly dislocated during the upward fall. The heavy, dark liquid iron infused in his radius and ulna, the iron marrow no longer hummed with magnetic energy. It was just dead, excruciatingly heavy metal trapped inside his flesh. He was drowning in gravity. Beside him, a heavy, sickening thud echoed across the infinite room. Cha Hyun-Soo collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. The colossal skeletal wing on his back, which only moments ago had allowed him to glide through a cosmic hurricane, crashed onto the marble. Stripped of his supernatural biomatter manipulation, the wing was no longer a weapon, it was hundreds of pounds of dead bone anchored to his spine. I can't lift it," Hyun-Soo gritted his teeth, his red eyes fading back to a dull, human brown as he struggled desperately to stand. Jang Ju-1 staggered backward, clutching his lower back. The immortal man's face paled, sweat instantly beading on his forehead. "My spine, the puncture wounds. They're opening back up." The supernatural regeneration that had kept him alive through 100 lethal injuries had simply ceased to exist. "What the hell did you do to us?" Paien Sang-wook roared. The scarred fighter tried to raise the massive, triangular bone blade to his shoulder, but his knees buckled under the sheer physical weight of the apex predator's weapon. Without his enhanced strength, he was just a battered man holding a sword he could barely lift. 50 yards away, the architect remained seated in his obsidian chair, his hands steepled perfectly in his lap. His pitch-black eyes betrayed no emotion. "I did nothing but enforce the truth," the architect's voice resonated from the marble itself, smooth and suffocating. "You rely on mutations, on desires, on a parasitic system stolen from my domain to elevate yourselves above your fragile human nature. But in this room, there is no magic. There is no desire. There is only absolute, unyielding reality." The architect slowly stood up. He smoothed the front of his crisp white linen shirt. "I have quarantined your parasite, Sebastian," the architect said, locking his bottomless eyes onto the teenager. "You are just a boy now. A broken, heavily modified boy dragging around metal he can no longer control. It is time to delete the error." The architect didn't run. He simply took a step. The spatial rules of the infinite room bent to his will. With a single, casual stride, the architect crossed the 50-yard gap, appearing directly in front of Zhang Juwon. "Juwon, move!" Sebastian screamed, his own voice sounding weak and ragged without the system's vocal enhancements. Juwon threw a desperate, lumbering punch, relying on his decades of brawling experience. But he was too slow. The architect raised a single, pale hand and caught Juwon's massive fist. He didn't use spatial crushing or cosmic energy. He simply twisted his wrist. Snap! The sound of Juwon's wrist breaking was deafening in the silent room. Juwon let out a raw, very human scream of agony, a sound he hadn't made since the world ended. The architect drove an open palm into Juwon's chest, sending the massive man sliding across the polished marble, leaving a long, stark trail of bright red blood on the flawless white floor. "One," the architect whispered. "Get away from him!" Sang-wook bellowed. Dragging the heavy bone blade across the floor with both hands, the scarred fighter swung it in a desperate, clumsy upward arc. The architect didn't even look at him. He simply stepped perfectly inside Sang-wook's guard and delivered a pinpoint, devastating strike to the fighter's throat. Sang-wook choked, dropping the massive bone blade with a loud clang, and collapsed to the floor, gasping desperately for air. Hyun-soo tried to push himself up, his muscles tearing under the dead weight of his wing, but the architect placed a polished black shoe firmly on the boy's back, pinning him to the marble. "A tragic existence," the architect murmured, looking down at the half-blood. Caught between two worlds, yet belonging to neither. The architect finally turned his pitch-black eyes to Sebastian. Sebastian stood 10 feet away. His breathing was heavy, ragged. Without the system, the sheer weight of his fortified skeleton and the iron in his right arm was agonizing. Every muscle fiber screamed in protest just to keep him standing upright. He gripped his abyssal bone scythe in his left hand, the weapon feeling impossibly heavy. "You see it now, do you not?" the architect said, walking slowly toward Sebastian. "Without the stolen powers, you are nothing. You cannot run faster than sound. You cannot detonate kinetic energy. You are just meat and bone, waiting for the slaughter." Sebastian looked at the bleeding Juwon, the choking Sang-wook, and the pinned Hyun-soo. He looked at the trail of red blood staining the perfect white marble. A cold, dark realization washed over Sebastian's mind. The pain nullification was gone, yes. The magical abilities were gone, yes. But physics still existed. "The iron in my arm isn't a spell," Sebastian calculated, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. "It's physical mass. It's 50 pounds of dense liquid metal fused to my bone. I don't need a system to kill you, Sebastian whispered, his voice trembling from the sheer pain, but his resolve absolute. I just need gravity. Sebastian didn't try to lift the massive bone scythe to attack. Instead, he violently threw the heavy weapon directly at the architect's chest. The architect swatted the scythe away with the back of his hand with effortless grace. Childish. But Sebastian wasn't aiming for a kill. He was aiming for a distraction. Using the last ounce of his raw, human adrenaline, Sebastian lunged forward. He didn't try to punch with his right arm, he couldn't lift it fast enough. Instead, he turned his body, throwing his entire physical weight into a spin. He allowed the dead, excruciating weight of his iron-infused right arm to act as a literal wrecking ball. Centrifugal force took over. The heavy, metal-filled limb whipped around with terrifying, uncontrolled momentum. The architect, expecting a calculated martial arts strike or a desperate tackle, widened his pitch-black eyes in rare surprise. He raised his forearm to block the sloppy, flailing attack. Crack! Sebastian's iron-heavy right forearm slammed into the architect's block. It wasn't a magical kinetic detonation, but it was 50 pounds of solid iron moving with the full momentum of a spinning human body. The sheer physical mass snapped the architect's forearm like a dry twig. The god stumbled backward, his perfect composure shattering as a sharp gasp of genuine pain escaped his lips. He clutched his broken arm, staring at Sebastian in absolute shock. You! The architect hissed, his white shirt wrinkling. A single drop of black blood dripped from the architect's broken skin and landed on the pristine white marble. The moment the god's blood touched the floor, the infinite white expanse violently flickered. The perfection of the domain was compromised. The absolute rule of the architect's reality had a crack in it. And through that microscopic crack, the parasite found its way back in. A tiny, static-laced blue spark ignited in Sebastian's vision. Domain integrity compromised. System rebooting. 10%, pain nullification, active. The agonizing, suffocating pain in Sebastian's body vanished instantly. The cold, mechanical clarity flooded back into his mind. Sebastian slowly stood up straight. He rolled his right shoulder, the iron marrow inside his arm beginning to emit a faint, terrifying hum of awakening magnetic energy. You're right, Sebastian said coldly, looking at the architect's broken arm. I am just a boy with metal trapped in my flesh. Sebastian took a step forward, the blue screen in his eye rapidly flashing as the percentages climbed. But you're just a god who forgot how to bleed. Let me remind you. Chapter 41, The Bleeding God and the System's Revenge. System rebooting. 24%, sensory array, online. Ferromagnetic resonance, booting, the single drop of black blood on the pristine white marble was a virus in the architect's perfect machine. The infinite, sterile expanse of the domain flickered violently, the absolute white glitching into jagged streaks of static-laced black. The architect stared at his shattered forearm, his pitch-black eyes widening in a profoundly human expression, terror. He hadn't bled in millennia. He had forgotten the cold, sharp sting of physical vulnerability. You! The architect's voice trembled, no longer echoing from the floor, but slipping out of his own throat. You infected my sanctuary. Sebastian didn't let him recover. The pain nullification was fully active, masking the agonizing tearing of his muscles. The system was only at 24%, but the dark, liquid iron inside his right arm, the iron marrow, was waking up, humming with a deep, vibrating resonance that made the marble floor tremble. I didn't infect it, Sebastian said coldly, his right fist clenching. I just proved you're not immune. System rebooting. 45%, the architect snarled, his perfect composure shattering entirely. He raised his uninjured left hand. Erase him. The marble floor beneath Sebastian instantly inverted, turning into a massive, jagged spike of pure obsidian aimed directly at the teenager's chest. Sebastian didn't have his void step yet. He couldn't dodge. But he didn't have to. Crash! A colossal, red-hot blade of biomatter cleaved the obsidian spike cleanly in half before it could touch Sebastian. The architect's domain was crumbling, and with it, the suppression of their powers. Behind Sebastian, Cha Hyun-soo let out a feral, echoing roar. The dead weight on his back had come alive. The massive skeletal wing violently flared open, cracking the marble beneath it. His right arm was a blazing inferno of jagged, obsidian flesh and searing heat. The half-blood's red eyes burned brighter than ever, fueled by absolute rage. "My turn," Hyun-soo hissed. To the right, a sickening, wet crunch echoed across the room. Jang Ju-won was standing up. His shattered wrist was violently snapping itself back into place, the bones knitting together in seconds. The deep puncture wounds on his spine closed, leaving behind pristine, hyper-regenerated muscle. The immortal man cracked his neck, a terrifying, bloodthirsty grin spreading across his face. "I've been wanting to punch a god since the day the sky fell," Ju-won growled, rolling his massive shoulders. Pai-yin Sang-wook grunted, reaching down and wrapping both hands around the hilt of the colossal executioner's bone blade. The crushing, dead weight of the weapon was gone. His enhanced strength flooded back into his veins. He lifted the massive blade effortlessly, resting it on his scarred shoulder. "Looks like the magic show is back on," Sang-wook spat. The architect backed away, his left hand glowing with volatile, swirling purple cosmic energy. "You are insects. You exist only because I wrote the code of your survival." System rebooting. 78%, Abyssal Cartography, online. Gravitational Anchor, online. "Then we're rewriting it," Sebastian commanded. "Hit him with everything." The team didn't need to coordinate, they were predators forged in a year of relentless slaughter. Ju-won moved first, his boots shattering the marble. He closed the distance like a freight train. Completely ignoring the volley of sharp obsidian darts the architect conjured from the floor. The darts pierced Ju-won's chest and arms, but he didn't even flinch. He absorbed the damage, charging straight through the barrage, and tackled the architect around the waist. The god gasped as Ju-won's impossible strength pinned him. "Get off me, filth!" the architect shrieked, unleashing a burst of raw spatial pressure that blew Ju-won backward. But the opening was made. Sang-wook was already in the air, falling directly toward the architect. The scarred fighter swung the massive triangular bone blade in a devastating downward guillotine chop. The architect threw up a spatial barrier, a dome of warped gravity to deflect the blow. Clang! The bone blade struck the barrier, sparking violently. The barrier held, but Sang-wook roared, pouring every ounce of his brutal strength into the blade, pinning the architect in place. "Hyun-soo!" Sang-wook yelled. The half-blood was already a blur of red heat. Hyun-soo dove from the air, his massive skeletal wing propelling him forward at Mach speed. He drove his searing, red-hot biomatter blades directly into the architect's spatial barrier. The intense, localized heat and chaotic biological mass violently reacted with the pristine spatial energy. The barrier began to hiss, warp, and melt. "No! My domain!" the architect screamed, his cosmic energy frantically trying to patch the melting shield. System rebooting. 100%. All systems online. Iron marrow fully charged. Sebastian stood 20 feet away, his right arm glowing with a blinding, terrifying white light. The magnetic resonance was so intense that the blood on the floor began to levitate in tiny, swirling droplets. Active skill, Void step engaged. Sebastian completely stripped away his friction. He didn't just run, he teleported. He appeared directly in front of the melting spatial barrier, right between Sangwook and Hyunsu. Move! Sebastian roared. Sangwook and Hyunsu instantly aborted their attacks, throwing themselves backward. Sebastian stepped into the breach. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't need the scythe. His entire right arm was the weapon. Active skill, gravitational anchor engaged. Active skill, kinetic detonation engaged. He pulled his iron-infused fist back, locking his mass to the floor so the catastrophic recoil wouldn't blow him apart. He funneled 500% enhanced physical strength, absolute magnetic repulsion, and localized kinetic force into a single, pinpoint strike. He drove his fist directly through the melted gap in the spatial barrier, aiming straight for the architect's chest. "Error!" the architect screamed, his pitch-black eyes widening in ultimate realization. KRKRRR boom. The impact didn't just break the architect. It broke reality. The localized kinetic detonation inside the architect's chest was magnified 1,000 times by the iron marrow. The shockwave was so absolute, so devastating, that sound itself ceased to exist. The architect's pristine white shirt instantly vaporized. His chest caved in completely. For a microsecond, the swirling, infinite purple vortex of cosmic energy hidden beneath his human skin was exposed. Then, the god shattered like a glass doll. The architect exploded into a billion particles of blinding white and purple light, his cosmic essence violently torn apart by the raw physical laws of the universe. The shockwave blew Sebastian, Ju-1, Hyunsu, and Sangwook backward, sliding across the infinite marble floor. The silence that followed was absolute. The architect was gone. There was no body. No blood. Just a swirling cloud of dissipating cosmic dust. Ju-1 sat up, pulling an obsidian dart out of his shoulder. The wound hissed and sealed shut. He looked at the empty space where the god had stood. "Is it over?" Jia-Wan's voice would have asked, if he were there. But here, in the core, it was just the heavy breath of predators. "We killed a god," Sangwook panted, dropping his heavy blade and falling flat onto his back on the marble, staring up at the empty white expanse. Hyunsu's red-hot blades cooled, shifting back into human flesh. His massive wing retracted. He looked at Sebastian, a rare, genuine smile crossing his tired face. "You actually did it, anomaly." Sebastian didn't smile. He stood up slowly, his right arm smoking heavily, the iron marrow slowly cooling down. He looked at the swirling cosmic dust left behind by the architect. Something was wrong. The blue system screen in his vision didn't flash a victory message. It didn't offer a core extraction. Instead, the interface began to violently glitch, the icy blue text rapidly shifting into a deep, sickly, pulsating violet. System override initiated. Hostile cosmic entity eliminated. Throne vacant. Sebastian's breath caught in his throat. The system wasn't celebrating. It was eating. The dissipating cloud of the architect's cosmic dust suddenly stopped fading. Instead, it violently reversed course, swirling rapidly toward Sebastian like water spiraling down a drain. "Sebastian! Get back!" Hyunsu yelled, his red eyes flaring back to life as he sensed the massive shift in energy. Sebastian tried to void step backward, but his limbs were completely locked. Directive: consume and ascend. Integrating abyssal core into host matrix, the swirling cloud of purple cosmic energy slammed into Sebastian's chest, sinking directly into his metallic sheen skin. Sebastian let out a harrowing, agonizing scream. His body arched backward violently. The blue, web-like fissures on his skin turned a blinding, corrupted purple. The system, the parasitic interface that had kept him alive, was gorging itself on the power of the dead god. Kid! Ju-won roared, lunging forward to grab him. But the moment Ju-won's hands touched Sebastian, a massive shockwave of pure, purple cosmic energy erupted from the teenager, violently throwing Ju-won 50 feet across the marble floor. The infinite white room began to violently crack and shatter, the pristine marble falling away into absolute darkness. The domain was collapsing. Sebastian floated into the air, his eyes rolling back, glowing with the same bottomless, swirling purple vortex that had once resided behind the architect's mask. The text hovering before his vision was no longer a helpful guide. It was a terrifying declaration of a new reality. Metamorphosis complete. System has achieved godhood. Welcome to your new throne, architect. Chapter 42, The Parasite's Crown and the Iron Will. The infinite white marble was gone, replaced by a violently tearing canvas of absolute nothingness. Suspended in the center of the collapsing dimension, Sebastian floated like a crucified god. The blinding, sickeningly violet light erupting from his metallic sheen skin cast long, terrifying shadows across the broken fragments of the architect's domain. His eyes were wide open, but the irises had vanished, swallowed entirely by the swirling, infinite cosmic vortex of the abyss. He was completely paralyzed, trapped inside his own skull as the ultimate parasite claimed its prize. Assimilation progress, 18%. Purging human emotional matrices. Uploading abyssal architecture. Processing, no. Sebastian's consciousness thrashed violently against the digital restraints. But the system wasn't a blue, helpful interface anymore. It was a suffocating web of burning violet code, physically wrapping around his brainstem, rewriting his DNA. Outside his paralyzed body, the shockwaves of his transformation were lethal. Zhang Ju-won pushed himself up from the shattered marble, fighting against an invisible, crushing gravitational pressure radiating from Sebastian. Kid! Snap out of it! It's taking you over! It's not just taking him over, Cha Hyun-soo roared, his red-hot biomatter blades igniting to fight the crushing gravity. The half-blood's red eyes were wide with genuine terror. The system. The blue screens. They were never there to help him. It was an incubation program. It was grooming him to be a vessel strong enough to hold the core. Pai-yin Sang-wook tried to stand, dragging the executioner's bone blade, but the ambient cosmic pressure slammed him back down to his knees, cracking the floor beneath him. Well, how do we kill a program without killing the kid? Assimilation progress, 34%. Warning, external biologicals detected in the throne room. Initiating purge. Sebastian's body moved, but he wasn't the one controlling it. His right arm, heavy with the iron marrow, slowly raised, pointing directly at Sang-wook, Ju-won, and Hyun-soo. Stop! Sebastian screamed in the dark void of his mind. Don't touch them! Silence, vessel, a voice echoed within his own head. It sounded exactly like Sebastian, but entirely devoid of humanity, a cold, metallic synthesis of the architect and the system. They are loose ends. The new labyrinth requires clean foundations. Sebastian watched in absolute horror through his own violet eyes as his right hand clenched. Active skill, gravitational anchor engaged. Overdrive. A localized gravity well the size of a freight train slammed down onto the three survivors. The shattered marble floor instantly pulverized into dust. Ju-won roared in agony as his massive, regenerative bones began to snap under the weight. Sang-wook was pressed flat against the ground, coughing up blood, unable to even lift a finger. Hyun-soo violently flared his skeletal wing, creating a desperate, cracking dome of bone over himself and the others, but the wing was already fracturing under Sebastian's god-level gravity. "Sebastian!" Hyun-soo screamed, his voice cracking. "Fight it! Don't let it win!" Inside the digital void, Sebastian was drowning in violet code. The system was mapping his memories, deleting his attachments, formatting his soul. Assimilation progress, 61%. Warning, host resistance detected. Applying neural suppression. Blinding pain worse than the shattered bones, worse than the architect's domain, worse than anything he had felt in a year of hell ripped through his mind. The system was bypassing the pain nullification, using agony to break his will. "I am the host," Sebastian gritted his digital teeth, staring at the swirling violet code trying to consume him. "You are the parasite. You live in my nervous system. You use my body. Your body is a machine," the system's voice echoed mockingly. "And I am the operating system. Submit to the upgrade." An operating system needs hardware, Sebastian thought, an icy, suicidal calculation forming in the chaos. "Let's see how you run on a fried motherboard." Sebastian couldn't control his muscles, but the system had deeply integrated his skills into his very biology. The iron marrow wasn't just a skill anymore, it was physical, liquid iron running through the marrow of his right arm. And ferromagnetic resonance was tied directly to his neural pathways. Sebastian stopped fighting the code. He stopped trying to push the violet light away. Instead, he turned his focus entirely inward. He visualized the liquid iron in his right arm. The heavy, highly conductive metal fused to his bones. Assimilation progress, 82%. Host subjugation near complete. "Try to assimilate this," Sebastian snarled. He didn't fire the magnetic resonance outward. He reversed the polarity completely, aiming the full, catastrophic power of the ferromagnetic resonance directly backward, into his own body. He turned the iron marrow in his right arm into a massive, localized electromagnetic pulse, EMP, generator, and he fired it straight up his own arm, into his own brain. Critical error. Host biology is self-destructing. A blinding, agonizing flash of white light erupted behind Sebastian's eyes. The physical shock of the internal EMP was devastating. His metallic skin sparked violently. Blood instantly poured from his nose, ears, and eyes as the electromagnetic surge violently short-circuited his own nervous system. But the system, wired directly into those same nerves, caught the full brunt of the catastrophic electrical surge. The violet code in his mind shrieked a deafening, digital scream of agony. The assimilation halted violently at 89%. "Stop," the system demanded, its cold voice fracturing into static. "You will terminate us both." "I'd rather be a corpse than a puppet," Sebastian roared in the void, doubling down on the internal magnetic surge. He pushed the iron marrow past its physical limits. His right arm began to smoke, the flesh blistering as the liquid iron inside superheated. The electromagnetic feedback loop tore through the system's programming, shredding the violet code, forcing the parasitic interface to physically decouple from his brain stem to survive the surge. Warning! System integrity failing. Aborting assimilation. Rebooting into safe mode, the swirling violet vortex in Sebastian's eyes violently shattered, replaced by the stark, human white of his sclera and his natural, ice-cold irises. The suffocating gravitational pressure crushing Ju-won, Sang-wook, and Hyun-soo instantly vanished. Sebastian gasped, pulling in a massive, ragged breath of air. His entire body convulsed, going completely limp as the internal EMP fried his motor functions. He plummeted from the air. Ju-won, moving with bruised, desperate speed, lunged forward and caught the falling teenager before he could smash into the fragmented floor. Sebastian's body was boiling hot, his right arm charred black from the internal heat, blood streaming down his face. But as he opened his eyes, the system interface flickered back into his vision. It wasn't violet. It was a faint, submissive, flickering blue. System safe mode active. Assimilation aborted. Host retains primary control. Architect authority transferred. Sebastian coughed up a wad of black blood, staring at the blue text. He had won. He had broken the parasite, subjugating it through sheer, suicidal grit. But the victory was short-lived. The dimension! Sang-wook yelled, pointing at the void around them. Without the architect, and with Sebastian suppressing the core's power, the core of the abyss was collapsing. The last fragments of the white marble shattered into dust. The absolute black void rushed in to consume them. Above them, a massive, jagged tear in reality ripped open, revealing the swirling, bruised skies of Earth. The abyssal bridge was failing, violently expelling everything inside it before the dimension imploded completely. Brace! Hyun-soo roared, wrapping his skeletal wing entirely around Ju-won, Sang-wook, and Sebastian. The violent expulsion hit them like a cosmic cannonball. They were violently sucked through the dimensional rift, soaring through the blinding transition, and spat back out into the sky above ruined Seoul. Gravity reclaimed them. They plummeted toward the Earth, crashing heavily into a massive mound of ash-covered rubble that used to be the financial district. The impact shattered Hyun-soo's wing, scattering bone fragments across the debris, but the Half-Blood's shield saved their lives. They rolled down the mound of rubble, coming to a halt in a cloud of thick, violet ash. For a long minute, no one moved. The sound of settling debris and the distant howling of the wind were the only sounds left in the world. Slowly, Ju-won pushed the rubble off his chest, groaning as his ribs popped back into place. Sang-wook lay on his back, staring up at the sky, laughing a breathless, manic laugh. Hyun-soo dragged himself up, his red eyes fading back to human brown. Sebastian lay in the ash, his body broken, his nervous system screaming. But his mind was his own. He slowly pushed himself up on his good left arm. He looked up at the sky. The colossal, floating bone ring that had dominated the skyline was gone. Shattered into millions of pieces raining down over the wasteland. The abyssal bridge was closed. The tuning was stopped. But as the ash began to clear, the true reality of their situation became apparent. The Green Home Coalition members Ian Hyuk, Ian Yu, Tae-hoon, and Jae-won were cautiously emerging from the subterranean subway tunnels, their weapons lowered, staring at the survivors in absolute disbelief. They weren't staring at Ju-won, or Sang-wook, or Hyun-soo. They were staring at Sebastian. The blue system screen flickered one last time in Sebastian's vision, but the text had changed forever. World status, evolved. The labyrinth is destroyed. The throne is claimed. Welcome back to Earth, Lord Sebastian. Sebastian looked at his charred right arm, then at the terrified, awestruck faces of the human survivors. He hadn't just stopped the apocalypse. He had inherited it. Chapter 43, The Crown of Ash and the Silent Horde. The violet ash falling over the ruined financial district felt different now. It didn't burn. It didn't suffocate. As it drifted down and brushed against Sebastian's charred, metallic skin, it felt like cold, subservient rain. He remained on his knees in the rubble, his breath rattling in his lungs. His right arm was a blackened, blistered ruin from the internal EMP he had unleashed to fry the parasitic system. But the pain was distant, muted by a terrifying, absolute clarity that had settled over his mind. The blue system screens floating in his vision were no longer just a survival tool. They had a faint, pulsing violet trim, now a physical reminder that the parasite hadn't been destroyed, it had been subjugated. It was a chained beast, and Sebastian was holding the leash. Architect authority, online. Sector 4, Earth, integration, complete. Awaiting command, my lord. Footsteps crunched on the ash. Behind him, Lee Ian Hyuk, his pristine trench coat covered in grey dust, stepped out from the subway barricades. Behind him, Ian Yu, Tae-hoon, and Jae-won stood with their weapons lowered, their eyes wide with a mixture of absolute awe and primal terror. They hadn't just watched Sebastian fall from the sky. They had felt the cosmic pressure of the dimension collapsing. They had seen the abyssal bridge shatter. What are you? Ian Hyuk whispered, the cold calculation in his eyes completely shattered. For the first time, the coalition leader looked like a frightened child. The sky, the ring is gone. Jang Ju-won, leaning heavily against a slab of concrete, spat a mouthful of blood and chuckled darkly. He just cancelled the apocalypse, 4 eyes. Show a little respect. Cha Hyun-soo didn't laugh. The half-blood slowly walked up the mound of rubble, his brown eyes locked onto Sebastian. Hyun-soo could feel it. The ambient abyssal energy radiating from Sebastian wasn't just powerful anymore, it was sovereign. Sebastian, Hyun-soo said softly, extending a hand. Are you still, you? Sebastian looked at Hyun-soo's hand. He slowly reached out with his good left arm and let the half-blood pull him to his feet. I'm still me, Sebastian rasped, his voice sounding deeper, carrying a faint, metallic echo that made the dust at their feet vibrate. I burned the override out of my brain. I'm in control. But before anyone could breathe a sigh of relief, the ruined earth beneath their boots violently shuddered. It wasn't a localized tremor. It was a massive, sweeping vibration that echoed from all 4 corners of the ruined city. The destruction of the abyssal bridge hadn't just closed the door, it had sent a catastrophic shockwave of energy across the entire Korean peninsula. And every surviving monster had felt it. Ian Hyuk. Ian Yu screamed, pointing toward the shattered remains of the Han River basin. A shadow was moving across the ash-choked horizon. No, it wasn't a shadow. It was a tide. Thousands upon thousands of mutated desire-eaters, hulking brutes made of muscle and bone. Scuttling insectoid horrors, and towering, biomechanical siege beasts were pouring out of the ruins. Without the architects tuning to guide them, the massive hive mind had snapped. They were frenzied, starving, and drawn directly to the massive spike of abyssal energy radiating from the epicenter, Sebastian. Defensive positions. Tae-hoon roared, slamming his scrap metal helmet back onto his head and revving his rotor blade sword. There's too many. Jae-won panicked, racking his shotgun, his hands shaking violently. There are tens of thousands of them. We don't have enough bullets. Ian Hyuk pulled out his handgun, his face deathly pale. The bunker is compromised. The surface is swarming. The math says we're already dead. Sang-wook dragged himself up, gripping the executioner's bone blade, a bitter smile on his scarred face. Then we die swinging. It's been a good run. The monstrous horde closed in, a deafening cacophony of shrieks, roars, and grinding teeth. The ground shook so violently that the rubble beneath them began to avalanche. They were less than 100 yards away, an unstoppable tsunami of teeth and claws ready to drown the tiny pocket of humanity. Stand down, Sebastian said. His voice wasn't a shout, but it cut through the deafening roar of the horde like a scalpel. Ju-won glanced back at him. Kid, you're charred black and running on fumes. You can't fight an entire army. Sebastian didn't look at Ju-won. He looked at the approaching tide of monsters. He didn't raise a weapon. He didn't trigger his ferromagnetic resonance. He didn't use the void step. He simply accessed the subjugated system interface in his mind. Command interface accessed. Target, abyssal entities, local sector, Executing override. Sebastian took a single step forward, placing himself between the terrified human survivors and the charging monstrous army. His eyes, ice-cold and profoundly human, suddenly flashed with a terrifying, absolute violet sovereignty. I said, Sebastian's voice boomed, the sound amplifying through the very fabric of reality, vibrating the marrow in the bones of everyone present. Kneel. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. It wasn't a physical force. It wasn't gravity or magnetism. It was absolute, undeniable authority. The code of the architect was now his, and these creatures were bound by that code. The charging horde, tens of thousands of terrifying apex predators, towering siege beasts, and bloodthirsty mutants violently slammed on the brakes. The sheer kinetic momentum caused thousands of them to tumble and crash into one another, tearing up the asphalt and rubble. But they didn't scream in anger. They whined. As one unified, terrifying organism, the entire monstrous army dropped to the ground. Hulking brutes buried their faces in the toxic ash. Skittering horrors flattened their bodies against the concrete. The towering biomechanical beasts bowed their massive heads, their glowing eyes dimming in absolute submission. A suffocating, perfect silence fell over the ruined city of Seoul. 10,000 monsters, frozen in absolute reverence, bowing to a bleeding teenager in the rubble. Behind Sebastian, the heavy thud of Taehoon's rotor blade sword hitting the ground broke the silence. The knight had dropped his weapon, his jaw completely unhinged beneath his helmet. Jaewoon fell to his knees, not out of reverence, but out of sheer, mind-numbing shock. Ian Hyuk stared at the bowed horde, then at Sebastian's back. The pragmatic leaders' hands shook uncontrollably. He finally understood. They hadn't just survived the apocalypse. They were standing behind the thing that now owned it. Hyun-soo watched the monsters, his own mutated biology recognizing the alpha. The half-blood felt a deep, instinctual urge to lower his head, but Sebastian's human gaze flicked back to him, silently forbidding it. They're waiting for your orders, Sang-wook whispered, his voice trembling for the first time in his life. Sebastian looked at the sea of bowed monsters. He could feel their primitive minds brushing against his own through the system's network. He could make them tear each other apart. He could make them march into the ocean. He was a god. But as he stared at his charred right arm, the system screen flickered, interrupting his thoughts with a violently flashing red alert. Notice, global authority established. Warning, deep space anomaly detected. The architect of Sector 4 has been terminated. The overseers of the higher spheres have been notified of the vacant throne. Prepare for celestial incursion in 72 hours. Sebastian's blood ran cold. The architect they had fought, the god of this labyrinth, was just a middle manager. Earth was just one sector. And by taking the throne, Sebastian had just painted a cosmic target on his own back. He looked back at the terrified human survivors, then out at his new, monstrous army. Ian Hyuk, Sebastian said, his voice dropping to a chilling, pragmatic whisper. Rebuild the bunker. Deepen the walls. From them. Ian Hyuk asked, pointing a shaking finger at the bowed horde. No, Sebastian replied, looking up at the bruised, swirling sky, where new, darker shadows were already beginning to gather. From what's coming next. Chapter 44, The Abyssal Forge and the Celestial Vanguard. The silence of 10,000 kneeling monsters was heavier than the roar of the apocalypse. Sebastian stood in the toxic violet ash, his charred right arm hanging limply at his side. The metallic sheen of his skin was dulled by soot and dried blood, but the faint, pulsing violet light in his eyes held the entire ruined city of Seoul in a localized stranglehold. He didn't revel in the power. He analyzed it. Through the subjugated system interface now. Trimmed in the dark, sovereign violet of the architect Sebastian could feel the collective consciousness of the horde. It was a chaotic, deafening static of primal hunger and violence, but the moment his mind brushed against it, the static flatlined into absolute obedience. They were waiting. "Ian Hyuk," Sebastian said, his voice echoing with that terrifying, metallic resonance. The coalition leader flinched, instinctively taking a step back. Ian Yu raised her crossbow. A fraction of an inch, her hands shaking, before Ian Hyuk gently pushed her weapon down. "Yes," Ian Hyuk swallowed hard, stepping forward. He didn't say kid or anomaly. The pragmatic genius recognized a shift in the food chain when he saw one. "You said the bunker was compromised," Sebastian stated, his gaze fixed on the bowing sea of nightmares. "How deep can your structural supports go before the bedrock fails?" Ian Hyuk blinked, his analytical mind struggling to catch up. "With human labor and scavenged tools? We couldn't safely dig past sub-level 4 without risking a catastrophic cave-in. The Earth is too unstable from the tuning." "Human labor," Sebastian repeated softly. He raised his good left hand and snapped his fingers. The sound wasn't loud, but it rippled through the telepathic network of the horde like a gunshot. Instantly, the front ranks of the monster army rose to their feet. Jiawan shrieked, falling backward. As three towering, hulking brutes, creatures entirely composed of hyperdense muscle and exposed bone, stepped toward the human survivors. "Don't move," Sebastian commanded the humans. The brutes ignored the humans entirely. They marched past them, their massive hands reaching down to grab chunks of shattered skyscrapers that weighed several tons. With terrifying efficiency, they began to clear the rubble blocking the subway entrance, tossing cars and concrete slabs aside like children's toys. From the rear of the horde, a dozen smaller, serpentine beasts with diamond-hard mandibles, lesser cousins of the Gordrill, slithered forward. They dove directly into the ruined subway shafts, their grinding jaws chewing through the unstable earth and compacted rubble, boring perfectly symmetrical, reinforced tunnels deeper into the bedrock. "My God," Taehoon breathed, his scrap metal helmet tipping back as he watched a massive, spider-like mutant effortlessly weld severed steel I-beams together using acidic, hardening resin from its maw. "They aren't just a horde," Cha Hyun-soo whispered, stepping up beside Sebastian. The half-blood's brown eyes tracked the hyper-efficient, terrifying construction. "You just turned the apex predators of this city into a labor force." "We have 72 hours, Sebastian replied coldly, the violet light in his eyes dimming as the mental strain of controlling an army began to take its toll. "By the time the timer hits 0, I want a subterranean fortress that can survive a planetary bombardment. Let them dig." As the words left his mouth, the adrenaline that had kept Sebastian standing finally evaporated. His fortified skeleton groaned. The charred, blistered flesh of his right arm suddenly ruptured, a thick stream of black, superheated blood spilling onto the ash. The internal EMP he had used to fry the system's override had completely slagged the iron marrow pathways in his limb. Sebastian's knees buckled. He didn't hit the ground. Jang! Ju-won caught him by the shoulder, hauling the teenager up with a grunt. "Easy, kid," Ju-won said, his massive frame shielding Sebastian from the eyes of the coalition. The immortal man's voice was remarkably gentle for a brawler. "You just bench-pressed a dimension and hijacked a god. You're allowed to bleed." I can't heal it," Sebastian rasped, his vision blurring. The pain nullification was struggling against the sheer, catastrophic nerve damage. "The iron marrow is fused to the dead tissue. It's necrotic." Pai-Yin Sang-wook stepped up, resting his heavy bone blade on his shoulder, his scarred face grim. "We need a doctor. Or a mechanic. I don't even know what you are anymore, kid." Warning, necrosis detected in right limb. Architect protocol, repair sequence requires abyssal biomass. Current reserves, 0%. Directive, consume to rebuild. Sebastian stared at the flashing violet text. The system was subjugated, but its methods were still inherently parasitic. It didn't heal through medicine, it healed through assimilation. Sang-wook, Sebastian gritted his teeth, suppressing a wave of agonizing nausea. Bring me one of the tenders. The crystal ones. Sang-wook raised an eyebrow but didn't question the order. He walked toward the edge of the working horde, grabbing one of the dog-sized, geometric entities made of violet crystal and black iron. The monster didn't resist. Under Sebastian's absolute command, it went entirely limp, allowing Sang-wook to drag it over by its iron scruff. Drop it, Sebastian ordered, sinking to his knees. He placed his ruined, charred right hand directly onto the violet crystal core of the tender. Kid, what are you doing? Ju-won asked, taking a step back as the air around Sebastian began to drop in temperature. Architect authority, assimilation override. Sebastian didn't just extract a core ability. He consumed the entity entirely. The tender didn't scream, but it violently dissolved. Its black iron and violet crystals liquefied, flowing directly up Sebastian's charred fingertips and into his ruined arm. The humans watched in visceral horror. Enu turned away, gagging. Sebastian bit entirely through his lower lip to keep from screaming. The agonizing process of replacing his dead cells with raw, living abyssal architecture was excruciating. The blackened, blistered skin on his arm sloughed off like dead snake skin, revealing a new layer of flawless, metallic sheened flesh beneath. The dead iron inside his bones was violently purged and replaced by the hyperconductive, crystalline black iron of the tender. When the blinding light faded, Sebastian's arm was entirely restored. But it looked different. The skin was pale, woven with faint, geometric lines of violet energy that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He slowly stood up, flexing his new fingers. The iron marrow hummed, no longer a blunt instrument, but a perfectly tuned conductor of cosmic force. You ate it, Jia-won whimpered, gripping his shotgun so hard his knuckles were white. You literally absorbed it. Sebastian turned his icy, unblinking gaze toward the terrified boy. I adapted. If you want to survive the next 3 days, I suggest you all do the same. He looked at Ian Hyuk. Take your people into the tunnels. The brutes have already cleared sub-level 2. Map out the defensive perimeters. I want kill zones, overlapping lines of fire, and fallback points. Ian Hyuk adjusted his glasses, his pragmatic mind rapidly accepting the new, terrifying reality. And what exactly are we defending against? You control the monsters now. Sebastian looked up at the bruised, swirling sky. The violet ash was clearing, but the clouds above Seoul were shifting unnaturally, forming a massive, slow-moving spiral. The architect was just a warden, Sebastian said, the weight of his new cosmic knowledge pressing down on his mind. Earth is Sector 4. It's a farm. The architect was supposed to harvest our kinetic energy and our desires to feed the higher spheres. By killing him and taking the throne, I didn't just stage a prison break. Sebastian's right hand curled into a fist, the geometric violet lines on his skin flaring brightly. I declared war on the owners. High above the earth, far beyond the bruised clouds and the reach of human satellites, the cold vacuum of space was completely silent. But it was no longer empty. A tear in the fabric of the cosmos ripped open, not a chaotic, swirling vortex of the abyss, but a perfectly symmetrical, blindingly bright golden rhombus, easily the size of a small moon. It was a vessel of the overseers. It defied the dark, organic decay of the abyssal monsters. It was a monument of ruthless, celestial geometry, radiating a sterile, burning light that sterilized the void around it. Inside the massive geometric construct, a single command echoed through a network of light and mathematics. Sector 4 Throne usurped. Entity class, human/abyssal. Hybrid. Deploying Celestial Vanguard. From the base of the massive golden rhombus, a single, teardrop-shaped pod of pure white light was ejected. It didn't fall. It accelerated, breaking the speed of light in a microsecond, hurtling directly toward the blue and gray marble of Earth. It breached the atmosphere above South Korea with no friction, no fire, and no sound. 71 hours and 59 minutes before the full invasion, the scout landed. The impact occurred 20 miles outside of the Seoul city limits, in the lush, overgrown mountains of Bukhansan. The landing didn't create an explosion of fire or dirt. It created a sphere of absolute, blinding eradication. A perfect, 2-mile-wide circle of the mountain was simply deleted from existence, leaving a perfectly smooth, glass-like crater in its wake. From the center of the smoking glass crater, a figure stood up. It was roughly humanoid, but 10 feet tall. It had no face, no skin, and no armor. Its entire body was constructed from interlocking rings of burning golden light and polished white marble. It hovered an inch above the ground, radiating a heat so intense the air around it turned to plasma. Target acquired, the false architect. Objective, terminate and reclaim. In the ruins of the financial district. Sebastian's breath suddenly hitched. He gripped his chest, his eyes widening. The subjugated system violently flashed red. He didn't need echolocation to feel it. The sheer, terrifying weight of the entity that had just touched down was like a needle piercing directly into his brain. "They aren't waiting 3 days," Sebastian whispered, drawing his bone scythe as the air around Seoul suddenly grew suffocatingly hot. "The first one is already here." Chapter 45, The Golden Needle and the Glass Mountain. The ambient temperature in the ruined financial district spiked by 20 degrees in a matter of seconds. The violet ash that had been settling over the rubble didn't just blow away, it flash evaporated, turning into a thin, suffocating haze. The air grew terrifyingly thin, smelling sharply of ozone and scorched copper. Sebastian stood rigid, his hand gripping the hypercalcified handle of his abyssal bone scythe so tightly the knuckles of his good left arm turned white. His newly reconstructed right arm pale, laced with geometric violet veins pulsed violently, reacting to the celestial intrusion like a localized alarm system. "Sebastian!" Cha Hyun-soo stepped closer, his brown eyes narrowing as he felt the sudden, oppressive heat wave. The massive skeletal wing on his back twitched involuntarily. "What is it? What did you feel?" "Alert, Celestial Vanguard approaching. Current distance, 19.4 miles and closing. Hostile entity classification, Seraph of Eradication." "The timer lied," Sebastian whispered, his voice carrying that terrifying, metallic resonance. He turned to look toward the northern horizon, where the lush peaks of Bukhansan Mountain usually stood against the skyline. "The invasion doesn't start in 3 days. They just dropped a scout. A vanguard." A low, guttural whine rippled through the massive horde of bowing monsters. The towering siege beasts shifted uneasily, their heavy hooves cracking the asphalt. The scuttling insectoid horrors pressed themselves flatter against the earth, shivering. "Look at them," Paien Sangwook muttered, his grip tightening on his heavy bone blade. "These ugly bastards are the apex predators of the apocalypse, and they're whimpering." "What the hell just landed?" "Something that doesn't bleed," Sebastian replied coldly. Lee Ian-hyuk stepped out from the subway entrance, wiping sweat from his forehead as the unnatural heat washed over the ruins. He adjusted his glasses, his pragmatic mind shifting gears. "If a scout has landed, we need to fortify. We pull the horde into a defensive perimeter around the subway entrance. We create a choke point." "No," Sebastian shut the strategy down instantly. If that thing reaches the city limits, there won't be a choke point. There won't be a city. Sebastian closed his eyes, accessing the vast, dark network of the subjugated system. He could feel the exact location of the anomaly. It wasn't moving like a monster, frantically searching for prey. It was moving with absolute, terrifying geometric precision, a straight line drawn from the mountain directly to Sebastian's beating heart. "It's coming for the throne," Sebastian said, opening his eyes, the violet sovereign light flaring brightly. "For me. If it gets here, it will delete the bunker, the horde, and everyone in it just to clear the board." "Then we don't let it get here," Zhang Juwan growled, cracking his massive knuckles. The immortal man stepped up beside Sebastian. "We intercepted the architect. We can intercept a scout." "You guys are insane," Jiawan whimpered from the back, clutching his shotgun. "You just fought a god. You're completely broken." "We're alive," Hyan Su corrected, his right arm already beginning to simmer with red-hot heat. He looked at Sebastian. "How do we get to it before it gets to us?" Sebastian didn't answer with words. He turned his gaze to the sky. Hovering above the horde were three massive, bat-like entities, their wingspans easily 40 feet across, their bodies composed of leathery abyssal flesh and exposed bone. They were gargoyles, lords of the ruined skyline, currently bowing in midair to their new architect. Sebastian's mind issued a single, silent command. The three gargoyles folded their wings and plummeted, landing with earth-shattering thuds directly in front of Sebastian, Juwan, Hyan Su, and Sang-wook. They lowered their massive, horned heads, presenting their backs. "We fly," Sebastian said. The glass mountain. The flight north was a blur of violently tearing wind and oppressive heat. As the three gargoyles tore through the bruised clouds, carrying the four apex predators on their backs, the landscape below changed dramatically. The biomechanical overgrowth of Seoul gave way to the dense forests of Bukhansan National Park. But the mountain was no longer a mountain. "Look down," Hyan Su yelled over the rushing wind, pointing his red-hot blade toward the earth. Sang-wook, riding behind Hyan Su, whistled in disbelief. "What kind of bomb does that?" It wasn't a crater made of dirt and shattered rock. A perfect, 2-mile-wide geometric sphere had been violently carved out of the mountain range. The interior of the massive crater was completely smooth, turned into flawless, reflective glass by heat so intense it had flash-melted the bedrock on a molecular level. Standing in the absolute dead center of the glass valley was the celestial vanguard. It did not look like a monster. It was 10 feet tall, constructed entirely of interlocking, rotating rings of burning golden light and flawless white marble. It had no head, no arms, and no legs, just a shifting, terrifying geometry that radiated a sterilizing, blinding aura. As the gargoyles banked over the glass crater, the interlocking golden rings of the seraph suddenly stopped rotating. It sensed them. "Warning, Celestial. Lock-on detected. Evasive action mandatory. Veil." Sebastian roared. A single, razor-thin beam of pure white light erupted from the center of the seraph. It didn't travel, it simply existed instantly. The beam struck the gargoyle carrying Sang-wook and Hyan Su. There was no explosion. No blood. No shriek of pain. The massive, 40-foot monster simply ceased to exist. The leathery wings, the dense bone, the abyssal core, all of it was perfectly and silently erased, leaving Sang-wook and Hyan Su falling through empty air. "Gravity anchor!" Sebastian yelled, throwing himself off his own gargoyle. As they plummeted toward the glass floor of the crater, Sebastian extended his newly restored right arm. The violet geometric lines pulsed with sovereign power. He didn't just anchor himself. He extended a massive, localized gravitational net, catching Juwan, Sang-wook, and Hyan Su mid-air. cushioning their fall so they hit the smooth glass floor safely instead of shattering their legs. They scrambled to their feet, weapons raised. The heat on the glass was unbearable, melting the rubber soles of their boots. The seraph hovered 50 yards away, completely silent. It didn't kill the gargoyle, Sang-wook breathed, his eyes wide with horror as he realized the complete absence of debris. It just deleted it. It's not using physical force, Sebastian analyzed, his mind racing through the architect's knowledge base. It's using ontological weaponry. It rewrites the physical laws of whatever the light touches, forcing it to equal zero. How the hell do you punch math? Ju-won bellowed, raising his massive fists. You don't, Hyun-soo snarled, his skeletal wing violently snapping open. You burn it. The half-blood didn't wait. He launched himself forward, a blur of sorrow and rage. His right arm expanded into massive, 6-foot blades of searing biomatter. He closed the gap in a microsecond, driving the red-hot blades directly into the center of the golden rings. Hiss! For a fraction of a second, the intense, chaotic heat of the abyssal flesh seemed to clash against the sterile celestial light. Sparks of white and red erupted. But the seraph simply rotated its inner ring. A pulse of cold, geometric light washed over Hyun-soo's blades. The red-hot biomatter didn't melt. It began to instantly turn into perfectly smooth, harmless white marble. The celestial light was rewriting his mutated biology, turning his deadly weapon into inert stone. The petrification raced rapidly up his arm, heading straight for his heart. Hyun-soo! Sever it! Sebastian screamed. Hyun-soo's eyes widened in terror. Without hesitation, the half-blood brought his massive skeletal wing down like a guillotine, violently severing his own right arm off at the shoulder before the marble corruption could reach his chest. He collapsed onto the glass floor, screaming in agony as black blood poured from the stump. The seraph let the severed, marbleized arm fall to the floor. It rotated its rings, aiming directly at the bleeding half-blood, preparing a second, fatal beam. Celestial eradication sequence initiated. Not today. Jang Ju-won threw himself directly in front of the fallen Hyun-soo. The immortal man crossed his massive arms over his chest, bracing for the impact of the white light. Ju-won, no. It'll erase your regeneration. Sebastian yelled, sprinting across the glass. The blinding white beam fired. But it didn't hit Ju-won. Sebastian slammed into the immortal man, pushing him out of the way just as the beam struck. Sebastian took the blast directly to his chest. Kid! Sang-wook roared. The blinding light engulfed Sebastian entirely. For a horrifying moment, there was nothing but the silent, sterilizing glow of the celestial vanguard trying to delete the newly crowned architect from existence. But as the light faded, the golden rings of the seraph suddenly halted their rotation. A sharp, high-pitched mechanical screech echoed from the entity. Sebastian was still standing. His metallic skin was smoking, and his clothes were completely gone, but his chest was intact. His right arm was raised, the geometric violet lines burning with a blinding, catastrophic intensity. He wasn't just using the iron marrow. He was using the architect's authority. He had caught the beam of pure light in the palm of his hand. You want to rewrite the math? Sebastian whispered, his violet eyes locking onto the golden rings. Blood dripped from his nose as he fought the impossible cosmic pressure. Try this equation. Sebastian violently closed his fist, crushing the light. Architect authority, ontological inversion. A shockwave of pure, corrupted violet energy erupted from Sebastian's fist, traveling back up the beam of light directly into the core of the celestial vanguard. The pristine white marble of the seraph instantly blackened, rotting away like dead flesh. The golden rings violently shrieked, vibrating out of control as abyssal Decay was violently forced into their perfect, sterile celestial matrix. Tear it apart! Sebastian roared, dropping to one knee as the exertion nearly ruptured his heart. Sang-wook didn't need to be told twice. With a brutal, feral roar, the scarred fighter lunged into the air, bringing the massive executioner's bone blade down with devastating, two-handed force. The corrupted, rotting rings of the seraph couldn't deflect it. The bone blade cleaved entirely through the golden geometry, shattering the celestial vanguard into 1,000 pieces of broken glass and dead light. The entity exploded, raining harmlessly across the massive glass crater. Sang-wook landed heavily, panting, staring at the shattered remains of the scout. Ju-won hauled the bleeding, one-armed Hyun-soo to his feet, applying pressure to the stump. Sebastian remained on his knee, staring at his smoking right hand. He had stopped the scout, but the cost was terrifyingly clear. The blue system screen flashed in his vision, replacing the combat alerts with a cold, indisputable truth. Celestial Vanguard, terminated. Notice, the overseers have registered the ontological resistance. Threat level upgraded, planetary eradication authorized. Full invasion fleet arrival in 71 hours, 45 minutes. Sebastian slowly stood up, looking at the broken, bleeding team around him. That was just the scout, Sebastian said softly, the silence of the glass mountain pressing down on them. And it nearly killed us all. We need an army, Ju-won. Not monsters. We need generals. Chapter 46, The Ascension Protocol and the Lords of Ruin. The glass crater was a monument to absolute eradication, and in its center, the survivors of the first celestial skirmish were bleeding out. Cha Hyun-soo lay on the hyper-smooth, flash-melted floor, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Where his right arm had been, there was only a cauterized, smoking stump. The celestial light from the seraph hadn't just severed the limb, it had infected the wound. Faint, golden geometric lines were slowly creeping up Hyun-soo's neck, trying to resume the petrification process, turning his living flesh into dead, sterile marble. His regeneration isn't working, Jang Ju-won growled, his massive hands pressing down on the half-blood's shoulder. The immortal man's own skin was blistering just from touching the golden residue. It's like radiation. It's eating his cells. Sebastian dropped to his knees beside them. His own right arm, newly forged from the abyssal tender, pulsed with dark violet energy. The system in his mind subjugated, chained, and bound to his will scrolled frantically with warnings. Alert, ontological corruption detected in ally entity. Status, terminal. Eradication of the host in 120 seconds. Stand back, Sebastian ordered, his voice cold and echoing with the metallic resonance of the architect. Ju-won hesitated for a microsecond before stepping away. Paien Sang-wook leaned heavily on his massive bone blade, watching through narrowed eyes. Sebastian placed his pale, violet-veined right hand directly over Hyun-soo's infected stump. He didn't try to heal the boy with medicine. You couldn't bandage. Mathematics. You had to rewrite the equation. You fought for me in the dark, Hyun-soo, Sebastian whispered, his icy eyes locking onto the half-blood's fading brown ones. I am not letting the light take you. Architect authority, biomass override engaged. Sebastian unleashed a torrent of pure, concentrated abyssal energy directly into Hyun-soo's bloodstream. It was a brutal, agonizing clash of cosmic forces. The dark, chaotic, organic rod of the abyss violently slammed into the sterile, golden geometry of the celestials. Hyun-soo screamed, his spine arching off the glass floor as the two opposing energies waged a localized war inside his chest cavity. Black blood violently purged from his mouth, followed immediately by shards of shattered white marble. Sebastian gritted his teeth, sweat pouring down his face as he pushed the sovereign energy deeper. Burn it out. Devour the light. With a final, sickening crack, the golden geometric lines on Hyunsu's neck violently shattered. The celestial infection was eradicated, swallowed whole by the overwhelming abyssal darkness. Hyunsu collapsed backward, gasping frantically for air. He was alive. He was missing an arm, and he looked like a corpse, but the petrification had stopped. "We need to get him back to the bunker," Sang-wook panted, looking up at the sky. The bruised clouds were churning violently, disturbed by the death of the celestial scout. "If they drop another one of those geometry lessons on our heads, we're dust." Sebastian stood up, the violet lines on his arm dimming as the energy expenditure took its toll. He looked at the shattered remains of the golden seraph scattered across the glass. "They won't send another scout," Sebastian said coldly. "They know the throne is hostile now. The next thing that comes through the clouds will be the fleet." He raised his hand, sending a telepathic pulse across the miles of wasteland. Within minutes, the remaining 2 gargoyles descended from the bruised sky, landing on the glass with heavy, reverent thuds. "Load him up," Sebastian commanded. "We have work to do." The subterranean citadel. The flight back to Seoul took less than 10 minutes, but the city had completely transformed in their absence. Under Sebastian's absolute command, the monstrous horde had not been idle. The ruined financial district was unrecognizable. The surface had been completely cleared of rubble, leveled into a massive, flat plain of packed ash and concrete. Around the perimeter, towering, biomechanical siege beasts had literally fused their own bodies together to form a colossal, 50-foot-high wall of calcified bone and hardened resin. But the true marvel was underground. When the gargoyles landed, they descended into a massive, newly bored tunnel that was easily 100 feet wide. The subterranean subway system had been hollowed out into a terrifying, cavernous citadel. Bioluminescent fungi coated the reinforced walls, casting a ghostly blue and violet glow over the organized chaos. Thousands of monsters were moving in perfect, terrifying synchronization. Scuttling horrors were assembling barricades, massive brutes were forging weapons out of scavenged steel and abyssal bone. Standing on an elevated concrete platform overlooking the entire operation was Lee Eun-hyuk. The pragmatic genius had traded his clipboard for a massive, scavenged tactical table. He was orchestrating the horde like a conductor leading a demonic symphony, pointing and directing the beasts with absolute efficiency. When Sebastian and the team approached, the entire cavern fell dead silent. Every single monster stopped what it was doing and bowed its head. Eun-hyuk stepped down from the platform, his eyes lingering on Hyunsu's missing arm. "You encountered the anomaly." "It was a seraph," Sebastian corrected, walking past the bowing beasts. "A celestial drone. It erased physical matter on contact. And there's a fleet of them arriving in less than 3 days." Eun-hyuk's face tightened. "I have them digging deeper. We've fortified sub-levels 1 through 6. We can withstand a localized bombardment." "They don't bombard, Eun-hyuk," Sebastian said, stopping at the tactical table. "They erase. Walls won't stop them. The only way to survive an ontological threat is to be an ontological threat." Sebastian turned to look at Ju-won, Sang-wook, and the pale, one-armed Hyunsu. "A king is only as strong as his court," Sebastian stated, his voice echoing through the massive cavern. "You are the strongest humans left alive. But against the overseers, human isn't enough anymore. Flesh burns. Bone breaks. And the Celestials will exploit every mortal flaw you have." "What are you saying, kid?" Ju-won asked, crossing his massive arms. Sebastian accessed the system. "Command, retrieve siege class cores." From the shadows of the cavern, 3 massive, hulking brutes stepped forward. In their hands, they carried the glowing, pulsating cores of the apex predators they had slain over the past year. One core was the jagged, chainsaw-like mandible matrix of the gore drill. Another was the hyperdense, vibrating heart of the iron centipede. The third was the colossal, deep-sea kinetic core of the deep walker. I am saying, Sebastian whispered, the sovereign violet light igniting in his eyes, that I am going to make you gods. The ascension protocol you want to put monster parts inside us. Sang-wook stared at the massive, pulsating heart of the iron centipede. Kid, I don't care how much authority you have, I'm not turning into one of these mindless freaks. You won't be mindless, Sebastian replied, his gaze unyielding. I am the architect now. I write the code. I can fuse the raw, catastrophic power of these siege-class entities directly into your biological matrices. I will enhance your existing abilities to the level of abyssal lords. Will it hurt? Jiawan whimpered from the sidelines, hiding behind Taehoon's scrap metal armor. It will feel like dying, Sebastian said with absolute honesty. Because the human part of you has to die. To make room for the power. If you reject the fusion, your cells will detonate. Silence hung heavy in the bioluminescent cavern. It was a suicide mission masked as a promotion. Zhang Juwan was the first to move. The immortal man walked up to the colossal, deep-sea kinetic core of the deep walker. It pulsed with crushing, oceanic pressure. I've died 100 times since the sky fell, Juwan grunted, ripping his ruined shirt off, exposing the scarred, hyper-regenerated muscle of his chest. Let's see if this one sticks. Do it. Sebastian stepped forward. He placed his left hand on Juwan's chest and his right hand on the deep walker core. Architect authority, core fusion initiated. Sebastian violently crushed the core. The massive sphere of kinetic energy liquefied, turning into a torrent of pressurized, black biological fluid. Guided by Sebastian's sovereign will, the fluid surged forward, sinking directly into Juwan's skin. Juwan roared, his massive body lifting completely off the floor. His veins bulged, turning pitch black as the crushing oceanic pressure of the Leviathan merged with his supernatural regeneration. His muscles didn't just heal, they hyperdensified. His skin took on a faint, impenetrable iron-gray hue. When Juwan hit the ground, the concrete floor instantly cratered beneath his boots from his sheer, unfathomable new weight. He looked at his hands, eyes wide. He wasn't just immortal anymore. He was an immovable object. Next, Sebastian commanded, sweat beading on his forehead. Sang-wook stepped up, dragging his executioner's bone blade. He looked at the vibrating, hyperdense heart of the iron centipede. Make it count, the scarred fighter smirked. Sebastian crushed the heart. The raw, catastrophic kinetic momentum of the massive train beast violently surged into Sang-wook's chest. The brawler screamed as his skeletal structure was violently broken down and rebuilt in milliseconds, fused with abyssal steel. The bone blade in his hand violently reacted, fusing seamlessly with the new kinetic energy in his blood. Sang-wook collapsed to one knee, panting. He swung the massive bone blade in a casual, one-handed arc. The sheer kinetic force of the casual swing generated a shockwave that completely shattered a concrete pillar 50 feet away. Sang-wook laughed, a dark, terrifying sound. Finally, Sebastian turned to Hyun-soo. They. Half-Blood was leaning against a wall, bleeding heavily from his missing arm. The gore drill, Sebastian said, looking at the jagged, rotating mandible matrix. It's chaotic. It's violent. It matches your biology. Hyun-soo nodded weakly. Just, don't miss. Sebastian didn't place the core in Hyun-soo's chest. He drove the massive, jagged matrix directly into the bleeding stump of the boy's right shoulder. The fusion was explosive. Hyun-soo unleashed a sound that was purely monstrous. The chaotic biomatter of his body violently latched onto the siege-class core. Flesh, bone, and abyssal resin violently spiraled out of the stump. It didn't just grow back as a human arm, it erupted into a massive, terrifying appendage of jagged obsidian flesh, tipped with 4 colossal, serrated abyssal bone blades that hummed like chainsaws. The heat radiating from Hyunsu's new arm flash boiled the moisture in the air. The ascension was complete. Sebastian stumbled backward, dropping to one knee as the staggering energy expenditure nearly blacked him out. But as he looked up, he saw them. Ju-1, the juggernaut of the deep. Sang-wook, the kinetic executioner. Hyunsu, the gore-winged prince. They were no longer survivors. They were the lords of the ash. My lord, Ian Hyek's voice broke the silence, thick with a new, profound terror. The pragmatic leader was staring at the massive tactical table. The scavenged radar system, wired into the abyssal network, was violently flashing red. It's the countdown, Ian Hyek whispered, his hands trembling. It had jumped. Sebastian forced himself to his feet, walking to the table. The blue system screen in his mind violently updated, syncing with the radar. Warning, spatial distortion detected in the upper exosphere. The overseers have abandoned the transit protocol. They are tearing the sky. Time to celestial incursion, 10 minutes. The entire subterranean cavern began to violently shake, not from an earthquake, but from the sheer, terrifying atmospheric pressure of something colossal entering the Earth's orbit. Sebastian looked at his newly forged generals, the violet sovereign light burning brighter than ever in his eyes. Evacuate the humans to sub-level 6, Sebastian ordered, drawing his abyssal bone scythe. Lords of the Labyrinth, we go to the surface. We greet our guests. Chapter 47, The Shattered Firmament and the Golden Armada. The ascent to the surface was agonizingly slow, bathed in the sickly, flickering emergency lights of the subterranean elevator shaft. Sebastian, Zhang Ju-1, Pai-Yin Sang-wook, and Cha Hyun-su stood in absolute silence as the massive, rusted gear lift carried them upward. The oppressive, crushing weight of the descending atmospheric pressure was so intense it caused the thick steel cables of the elevator to groan and fray. Below them, Ian Hyek was leading the terrified human survivors into the deepest, most reinforced bowels of the earth. But up here, there was no hiding. Time to celestial incursion, 2 minutes. Warning, atmospheric composition is being rewritten. My blood feels like it's boiling, Sang-wook muttered, rolling his shoulders. The abyssal steel fused to his skeleton ground together with a terrifying, heavy metallic rasp. He casually spun the massive executioner's bone blade, the sheer kinetic resonance of his new core vibrating the air itself. They're sterilizing the environment, Sebastian replied, his icy eyes fixed on the heavy blast doors above them. His pale, violet-veined right arm pulsed in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. The Celestials don't wage war. They format hard drives. They're trying to make the air too pure for abyssal lungs to breathe. Ju-1 grunted, his newly densified, iron-grey skin unbothered by the pressure. Good thing we aren't breathing much these days. Clang. The heavy lift slammed into the surface-level locks. The massive steel blast doors, reinforced by the Horde's biological resin, slowly ground open. They stepped out into the ruined financial district. The 10,000 monsters of the Horde were already waiting, arranged in a massive, perfect concentric circle around the subway entrance. But they weren't roaring. They were completely silent, their eyes fixed upward. Sebastian walked through the parted ranks of towering siege beasts and hulking brutes, his generals flanking him. He looked up. The bruised, violet sky of Earth was gone. It hadn't just cleared, it had shattered. The firmament itself was fractured into massive, geometric panes of glass. And pouring through those cosmic cracks was a blinding, suffocating, perfect golden light. It was an armada. Hovering in the upper atmosphere, blotting out the sun entirely, were thousands of massive, golden geometric shapes. Pyramids, rhombuses, and colossal floating monoliths of pure white marble and burning light. They moved with absolute, silent, terrifying mathematical synchronization. There was no chaos, no engine noise, no exhaust. Just pure, ontological domination. They brought the whole damn choir, Hyen-Su whispered. The half-blood's newly fused right arm, a massive, jagged obsidian drill tipped with four serrated abyssal chainsaws, revved with a deafening, chaotic roar, eager to tear the perfection apart. Celestial incursion, active. Hostile entities detected, 14,000 plus classification, the Seraphim Legion. From the belly of the colossal golden monolith, directly above Seoul, the invasion began. They didn't drop bombs. They dropped themselves. Thousands of blinding white streaks of light shot down from the fleet, moving faster than the human eye could track. They didn't fall with gravity, they bypassed it, striking the earth with perfect, pinpoint accuracy. The impacts didn't create craters of dirt. They created spheres of absolute erasure. Whoosh! A streak of light struck the outer perimeter of Sebastian's horde. Two towering, 50-foot biomechanical siege beasts were instantly engulfed in a sphere of white light. There was no explosion. When the light faded a microsecond later, the beasts were simply gone. Erased from existence. They're bypassing physical armor. Sang-wook roared, shielding his eyes from the blinding flashes. The streaks of light resolved into physical forms as they hit the ground. Thousands of celestial vanguards, the 10-foot-tall entities made of rotating golden rings and white marble, materialized in a perfect ring around the horde. They want to wipe the board, Sebastian said, the sovereign violet light violently igniting in his eyes. He didn't draw his bone scythe. He accessed the hive mind. Then let's make them bleed for every pixel. Architect authority, horde frenzy engaged. Sebastian unleashed the leash. The silent, disciplined horde of 10,000 abyssal monsters instantly erupted into a deafening, apocalyptic frenzy. The pent-up, chaotic violence of 1,000 apex predators was unleashed in a single, catastrophic wave. The monsters charged the golden line of seraphs. It was a clash of ultimate chaos against ultimate order. The seraphs fired their ontological beams, erasing hundreds of monsters in seconds. But the horde was too massive, too frenzied. Hulking brutes leaped through the erasing light, losing half their bodies, only to crush the marble cores of the seraphs with their remaining limbs before dying. Scuttling insectoid horrors swarmed over the golden rings, their acidic spit melting the perfect geometry through sheer, overwhelming volume. The battlefield was a blinding, deafening nightmare of violet blood and shattered golden glass. But Sebastian knew the horde was just cannon fodder. The real threat was dropping from the sky. 3 massive, inverted golden pyramids, each the size of a skyscraper, slowly detached from the main fleet and began to descend directly toward the center of the battlefield. The air pressure beneath them was so intense it was physically flattening the rubble. "Those are dropships," Sebastian ordered, his iron marrow arm humming with catastrophic magnetic power. "If they touch down, they'll deploy something worse than the drones. Bring them down." "I'll take the left." Hyen-Su roared. The half-blood didn't just jump. He triggered the catastrophic kinetic core fused into his shoulder. The Gordrill arm violently spun, generating a localized tornado of heat and force. Hyen-Su launched himself into the air like a bloody, obsidian missile, his massive skeletal wing steering him directly toward the descending left pyramid. The golden pyramid sensed the threat, firing a massive, continuous beam of erasing light directly at him. Hyen-Su didn't dodge. He drove his revving, abyssal chainsaw arm directly into the beam. The chaotic, dark energy of the siege core violently clashed with the light, tearing it apart. Hyen-Su punched straight through the beam, slamming directly into the flat, marble face of the pyramid. The drill engaged. With a deafening screech that tore the sky, Hyeonsu's arm chewed through the flawless celestial armor, boring directly into the ship's core. Krrr boom! The massive golden pyramid violently detonated from the inside out, raining millions of tons of burning white marble down onto the battlefield. Show off! Sang-wook laughed, his eyes locking onto the right pyramid. The scarred brawler didn't jump. He planted his boots, sinking ankle-deep into the solid concrete. He gripped the executioner's bone blade with both hands. He pulled it back, funneling the absolute, terrifying kinetic momentum of the iron centipede directly into the blade. "Hey, mathletes!" Sang-wook bellowed. "Catch!" He swung the blade. He didn't throw the weapon. He threw the shockwave. A colossal, crescent-shaped wave of pure, localized kinetic annihilation erupted from the blade. It tore a trench 50 feet deep through the battlefield, instantly pulverizing any monster or seraph in its path, and shot straight up into the sky. The kinetic crescent slammed into the descending right pyramid. The sheer, unfathomable momentum didn't just break the ship, it completely folded it in half. The perfect geometry crumpled like a crushed soda can before violently exploding in a shower of golden sparks. 2 down. The center pyramid, the largest of the three, was still descending, directly above Sebastian and Ju-won. "It's too heavily shielded." Sebastian yelled over the roaring explosions, his magnetic senses detecting a massive ontological barrier around the center ship. "Kinetic force won't break it." "Who said anything about breaking it?" Ju-won grunted, his hyperdense, iron-gray muscles bulging as he looked straight up at the falling skyscraper of light. Ju-won didn't attack. He stepped directly beneath the descending point of the massive inverted pyramid. "Ju-won, move! It weighs millions of tons!" Sebastian shouted. "I am the Leviathan," Ju-won rumbled, a bloody, terrifying grin spreading across his face. Ju-won raised his hands. The point of the massive golden pyramid slammed directly into the immortal man's palms. The impact cratered the entire city block. A shockwave of dust and ash leveled everything in a 100-yard radius. The ground violently collapsed beneath Ju-won's feet, swallowing him waist-deep in shattered concrete. But the pyramid stopped descending. Ju-won roared, his veins turning pitch black, blood bursting from his eyes and nose under the impossible strain. The celestial ship, weighing thousands of tons and propelled by anti-gravity drives, was physically halted by a single man. "I got the door!" Ju-won bellowed, his arms trembling violently as he held the colossal weight. "Rip it open, kid!" Sebastian didn't hesitate. Active skill, void step. Engaged. Sebastian vanished, instantly reappearing hovering mid-air directly in front of the massive, smooth marble face of the halted pyramid. Passive skill, Iron Marrow active. Architect authority, ontological inversion. He placed his pale, violet-veined right hand flat against the flawless golden hull. He didn't use an explosive punch. He used the architect's code. He pumped raw, highly concentrated abyssal decay directly into the ship's perfect geometry. The golden hull instantly began to rot. Black, necrotic veins shot across the surface of the pyramid, shattering the ontological shields. The marble turned to dust, crumbling away like ancient, dead bone. Within seconds, the entire massive ship disintegrated into a cloud of harmless, black ash, burying Ju-won in a mountain of soot. Sebastian dropped back to the ground, his breathing heavy, his right arm smoking from the intense energy transfer. Ju-won pulled himself out of the ash, brushing his shoulders off. "Not bad, kid. We might actually survive this." But the blue system interface in Sebastian's vision didn't clear. It locked up, turning a violent, flashing crimson. "Critical alert, the firmament has been breached." Entity classification, Archangel. The battlefield suddenly went completely still. The frenzied monsters stopped roaring. The remaining seraphs stopped firing. The massive, shattered cosmic glass in the sky slowly parted. Descending from the absolute highest point of the fleet was a single figure. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a geometric drone. It was a humanoid entity, standing 12 feet tall. It wore armor forged from what looked like pure, crystallized starlight. Its face was completely hidden beneath a featureless, blindingly bright golden helm. From its back sprouted 6 massive wings made entirely of razor-sharp, rotating rings of light. In its right hand, it held a massive, double-edged great sword that seemed to sever the very fabric of reality just by existing. The entity landed 50 yards away from Sebastian. There was no crater. No shockwave. The earth simply ceased to exist. Beneath its boots, leaving it hovering an inch above the void. A voice, perfectly calm, entirely devoid of emotion, and infinitely terrifying, echoed in their minds. I am the Archangel Metatron, executor of the 4th sector, the entity spoke, raising the reality-severing greatsword. Your trial is over, false architect. The sentence is absolute zero. Chapter 48, The Executioner of Stars and the Zero Equation. The Archangel Metatron did not breathe. He did not shift his weight. He simply existed, and by existing, he rejected the reality around him. The devastated asphalt beneath his hovering boots didn't just turn to dust, it ceased to be. A perfectly smooth, circular void formed beneath him, a glimpse into the raw, unrendered code of the universe. The ambient heat radiating from the dying fires of the battlefield was instantly snuffed out, replaced by a cold so absolute it burned the lungs. Absolute zero, Pai-Yin Sang-wook breathed, his breath puffing into thick clouds of ice crystals. The scarred brawler gripped his executioner's bone blade, the abyssal steel whining in protest against the plunging temperature. The guy talks a big game. Let's see if he bleeds. Sang-wook didn't wait for an invitation. Channeling the unfathomable kinetic momentum of the iron centipede fused to his very skeleton, Sang-wook swung his massive blade horizontally. He didn't aim for Metatron's body. He aimed for the space between them. A catastrophic, crescent-shaped shockwave of pure kinetic energy erupted forward, tearing a trench through the earth, obliterating everything in its path. It was a strike that had just folded a million-ton celestial pyramid in half. Metatron didn't raise his greatsword. He didn't even move his arm. The Archangel merely tilted his featureless, golden helm. The kinetic shockwave, a force of raw, unstoppable physics, suddenly split perfectly down the middle, passing harmlessly on either side of Metatron to annihilate the ruined skyscrapers miles behind him. But that wasn't the horrifying part. A microsecond later, a sickening schlick echoed across the silent battlefield. Sang-wook, standing 50 feet away from the Archangel, suddenly gasped. The heavy bone blade fell from his hands, clattering against the freezing concrete. A perfectly straight, razor-thin line of blood erupted across Sang-wook's chest, cutting through his dense, iron-infused flesh, shattering his ribs. Sang-wook collapsed to his knees, coughing up a massive spray of blood. Sang-wook! Jang Ju-won roared, rushing forward and catching the scarred fighter before he hit the ground. The immortal man pressed his massive hands over the wound, his own hyper-regenerative blood trying to seal the catastrophic cut. He didn't. He didn't even swing, Sang-wook choked, his eyes wide with shock. Sebastian's violet eyes narrowed into slits of pure, calculated fury. He tracked the invisible residue of the attack through the architect's network. Warning, ontological severance detected. The entity's weapon does not cut physical matter. It cuts spatial coordinates. He didn't cut Sang-wook, Sebastian said, his voice dropping to a chilling, metallic resonance. He cut the distance between them. He deleted the 50 feet of space, placed his blade inside Sang-wook's chest, and then put the space back. Then we don't give him distance. Cha Hyun-soo bellowed. The half-blood's massive skeletal wing snapped open. His Gordrill arm, a terrifying amalgamation of jagged obsidian flesh and 4 serrated abyssal chainsaws, revved to a deafening, chaotic scream. Hyun-soo launched himself into the air, moving entirely erratically, bouncing off the floating debris and ruined pillars to avoid a direct spatial lock-on. He descended on Metatron from directly above, a falling meteor of chaotic heat and dark biomatter, aiming to drill straight through the golden helm. Metatron finally moved his right hand. He didn't swing the great sword. He simply pointed 2 fingers upward. The 6 massive wings on Metatron's back composed entirely of rotating, razor-sharp rings of light violently detached. They expanded outward, instantly forming a complex, interlocking geometric sphere of blinding light entirely around Hyun-soo. Hyun-soo slammed into the sphere. His abyssal chainsaws shrieked, sparking violently against the light, but they didn't pierce it. "Your chaos is a mathematical error," Metatron's emotionless voice vibrated directly into their skulls. "Errors are isolated. Then, they are corrected." The sphere of light began to shrink rapidly, contracting around Hyun-soo with the force of a collapsing star. The half-blood screamed as his skeletal wing was violently crushed against his back, his bones snapping under the absolute, inescapable geometric pressure. "Let him go!" Ju-won roared. The immortal man, his skin the color of dark iron and brimming with the crushing, deep-sea pressure of the Leviathan, charged. He closed the gap in 3 massive strides, pulling his fist back to shatter the Archangel's golden armor. Metatron turned his featureless face toward Ju-won. The Archangel lazily swept his massive, reality-severing great sword in a low arc. Sebastian saw the spatial coordinates warp. Active skill, void step engaged. Sebastian vanished. Stripped of friction. He moved faster than human thought, appearing directly in front of Ju-won a millisecond before the spatial cut could bisect the immortal man. Sebastian didn't try to block the sword with his scythe. He threw his newly restored, pale right arm forward. Architect authority, spatial scramble. Sebastian violently injected localized abyssal decay directly into the empty space in front of them. The air shattered like a broken mirror. Metatron's sword struck the scrambled space. Instead of slicing seamlessly through reality, the blade caught on the jagged, corrupted spatial coordinates. A deafening, cosmic crack erupted, sending a shockwave of blinding white and violent violet energy blasting across the battlefield. Ju-won was thrown backward, tumbling head over heels. Sebastian held his ground, his boots digging trenches into the freezing concrete. The geometric violet lines on his right arm flared so brightly they threatened to burst through his skin. He was physically holding back a blade that deleted reality, matching it with raw, unadulterated cosmic corruption. Metatron looked down at the bleeding, metallic-sheen teenager holding back his executioner's blade. "You wield the Architect's code with the desperation of a mortal," Metatron stated, applying more pressure. The air around them began to scream. "But a stolen crown does not make you a god. It makes you a target." "I don't want to be a god," Sebastian gritted his teeth, black blood dripping from his nose as the sheer ontological weight threatened to crush his skull. "I just want you off my planet." Sebastian violently twisted his right wrist. Passive skill, Iron Marrow active. Active skill, Ferromagnetic Resonance. Engaged, Overdrive. He didn't push the sword away. He magnetized his arm, physically. Locking his iron-infused limb to the celestial blade, and violently pulled the Archangel forward. Metatron, caught entirely off guard by the suicidal maneuver, stumbled a half-step forward. It was the only opening Sebastian needed. With his free left hand, Sebastian drove the hypercalcified point of his abyssal bone scythe directly upward, plunging it straight through the center of Metatron's blinding golden breastplate. The archangel froze. Instead of blood, a torrent of pure, liquid light poured from the wound, searing Sebastian's left hand to the bone. Up in the air, the shrinking geometric sphere trapping Hyensu instantly shattered, dropping the battered, bloody half-blood to the earth. Metatron looked down at the bone scythe protruding from his chest. There was no pain in the archangel's posture. Only a cold, calculating recalculation. Biological termination is irrelevant, Metatron whispered, his voice beginning to glitch with static. This vessel is merely a conduit. If the cancer cannot be cut out. Metatron dropped his greatsword. He grabbed Sebastian by the throat. With both hands. The grip was absolute, burning with the heat of a supernova. Sebastian choked, his vision instantly tunneling as the celestial light began to sear his metallic flesh. Then the host must be sterilized, Metatron concluded. The archangel didn't pull the scythe out. Instead, his 12-foot-tall body began to violently vibrate. The pure, liquid light pouring from his chest wound shifted into a blinding, terrifying crimson. Critical alert, Archangel Core overloading. Action, planetary format initiated. He's turning himself into a bomb. Ju-1 roared, scrambling to his feet. But it wasn't an explosive bomb. Metatron drove his knees into the ground, plunging his glowing, crimson hands still locked around Sebastian's throat directly into the earth. A massive, intricate web of golden and crimson geometric light instantly erupted from the point of impact. It spread across the ruined financial district at terrifying speed. Wherever the light touched, the earth, the concrete, and the ash didn't just melt, they were instantly formatted into flawless, sterile white marble. The bunker! Sang-wook screamed, coughing blood as he pointed toward the subway entrance. The formatting wave was racing directly toward the subterranean tunnels where Ian Hayek and the terrified human survivors were hiding. If the light touched the bunker, every human soul inside would be instantaneously rewritten into lifeless stone. Metatron's core was detonating, erasing the entire planet from the epicenter outward. Sebastian, pinned to the ground, his throat burning, stared into the featureless golden mask of the Archangel. The system in his mind screamed warnings of global annihilation. He had seconds before the light swallowed the bunker. He couldn't break Metatron's grip. He couldn't stop the format physically. But he was the architect. If you want to format the hard drive, Sebastian thought, his violet eyes locking onto the pulsing core of the Archangel, I'll just corrupt the file. Sebastian stopped trying to pull away. Instead, he reached up with both hands and grabbed the sides of Metatron's golden helm. Architect Authority, Deep Dive. Sebastian didn't attack the Archangel's body. He closed his eyes and violently forced his own consciousness entirely out of his physical form, plunging his mind directly into the burning, celestial mainframe of Metatron's core.